Bonne soirée à tous et bienvenue à cette rencontre du comité de dérogation pour la Ville d'Ottawa. Welcome everyone to this Committee of Adjustment for the City of Ottawa. So I have a number of comments that I need to make as we start. First off, just to let you know, this is in fact a committee that is appointed by City Council to make decisions on certain types of planning applications, most notably, of course, minor variances and consents, although there are some others. My name is Anne Tremblay, and with me tonight I have my fellow four panel members. I have Julia Markovich, Mr. Colin White, Mr. Scott Hindle, and Ms. Kathleen Willis. Can I have the gallery view, please? All right, thank you very much. So just before I go any further, just for some of you, Ms. Willis will be participating throughout the entire hearing. If you don't see her, it's only because she needs to have her screen off, but she will be listening and will be on screen for decision-making time. So just to let you know that. Also, I'd like to welcome tonight, as always, we have our wonderful committee staff that makes everything happen for us. So our Secretary Treasurer is with us this evening, Mr. Michel Bellemare. And we also have two coordinators in the background to help you out throughout the meeting. We have Ms. Mandy Nguyen and Mr. Alexander Jones. Hello. Mr. Jones is new to us this evening, so welcome. All right, with that, just take note, you are being live streamed on YouTube, the entire hearing. If you want to see this or the agenda later on, it's easy to do so. You just need to go to the city's webpage and find the information. If you have any issues with that, please don't hesitate to contact committee staff. They can help you with all of that. So with regards to the committee's jurisdiction, so the committee can only really deal with applications that are before it. There's a number of things, though, in development that can occur that is truly outside of this panel's jurisdiction. So things like, for example, issues related to noise or pollution or property values, those are not things that the committee can do anything about. We really do need to just focus on the merits of the proposal articulated in the application. We also can't talk about prosecution for illegal construction, won't entertain any personal comments about anybody, whether it's the applicant, owner, resident, anybody who's participating in these proceedings will be treated with respect at all times. So that's rule number one. Also, if we find during the course of discussions that variances either need greater relief or that we identify that an additional variance is required, then we need to adjourn that item and then bring it back to a later meeting of the panel or the committee in order to allow recirculation of the application. So as part of the statutory the statutory public notification requirements, there is a requirement that a sign be posted on properties and that a statutory declaration be provided to committee staff saying that in fact has been done. In the old days, prior to COVID, we had those in hand. They were all done at the very beginning of the meetings. Now that we're online, we have been going with a solemn oath or a swearing or an affirmation that sign has been posted. So we will do that this evening because I believe we don't have any of the hard copies with us at all. So before we hear an application, we have to have that declaration completed and on file, whether it's verbal or it's in writing. So with respect to quorum, we are still doing hearings virtually. That will change in the fall. But for the time being, we're still virtually, which means we're at the mercy of technology. We're 5 this evening, so we're not likely to lose quorum. But if that would happen, then of course we would just step down any of the items that hadn't been heard to a later meeting. So you saw an agenda at the beginning of the hearing. So that agenda essentially is all of the applications that we will either adjourn or that we will hear during the course of the evening. So, and with that, then just about the hearing process. So in some cases, we will ask for a presentation. In some cases, we will ask the applicant questions to get clarification on the application. We do have a chance to go through all of the information that's provided to us. We have that information in hand days before the hearing, and then we also have the opportunity to pre-meet and talk about any additional or new information that's come in. So that has already occurred. So when we deal with some applications, it may seem that we're really dealing with them very quickly, but the reality is we have already had the chance to review the information. We ask questions for clarification if there's things that either seem to be a little bit misaligned or that we need greater information about. So if once we get through the questions or in the presentation and then followed by questions, we go to the public portion of the meeting, which is then I will turn to a speakers list, go through the speakers list, if there are any speakers on a particular item, and then I'll open it up to anybody else in the audience who would like to speak to the committee. Where we have contentious applications, and we do have one this evening, we will ask that you appoint a spokesperson. So the intent is really to get all of the issues out right from the outset. So I take great notes on these things. So we'll get all the issues out. If you as a member of the public, the resident nearby, and you want to speak to the application, pardon me, you can still do that. There's no issue. All that we would ask is that you not repeat things that we've already heard, because we are taking notes and we will ask clarifying questions at the end, and there'll be an opportunity to get additional information at that point. So with that, then, once we've concluded the public portion, we will close it down. So in other words, no more public comments after that portion. And then it's the committee's opportunity to deliberate on the application. There's a couple of things we can do. Obviously, we can grant the applications, we can deny the applications. We can decide to further adjourn the application if there's new information that's come forward that truly needs to have greater vettings or research, or we may ask staff to look into something for us, maybe a legal opinion. It could be any number of things. So that sometimes happens as an adjournment. And then there's reservations of the applications as well, where we find that there, again, is a lot of new evidence that's been provided to the committee, where we feel we need to spend more time, and not just in the committee, so that we would reconvene right after the hearing to talk about those files that have been reserved. And typically it's not more than one per evening. And then we would make a decision that same night. So coming to decisions, we can make oral decisions, obviously, and you will hear those where we haven't reserved or we haven't adjourned. But then there are paper copies of that decision that is issued within 10 days of the hearing. And that elaborates essentially what the reasoning is of the committee, one way or the other. So if you would like to have that information, then just please make sure that committee staff is aware that you would like to have a copy of that decision. Once that decision's been issued, the decisions of the committee are subject to a 20-day appeal period, where anyone who objects to the decision of the committee can, in fact, appeal that to the the Ontario Planning Tribunal, Land Tribunal. My mistake. Sorry about that. So it's the Ontario Land Tribunal now. And there's a fee, obviously, to do that. So if you are a member of the public and that's not on my speakers list and you do want to address the committee, I would just ask that you start your presentation with your full name and your municipal address. And that way we're sure that we have a clear record of all of that. So that pretty much concludes my opening remarks. If you'd like anything in any of these instructions or these remarks in French, we can provide them to you. That is possible. And of course, anybody can address the committee in either official languages. So with that, I need to go to the declaration of conflict of interest by anyone. Go ahead, Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I need to declare interest on a couple of items that are on the panel 3 agenda today. Item number 8, 1364 Stittsville Main Street, and item number 12, 173 Rivington. I do periodically do some consulting work with the agent on that application, and therefore I deem it appropriate to declare interest.
All right, thank you, Mr. White. Anyone else from the committee? Declaration of conflict of interest, either for our panel or any other panel that heard applications today? Not seeing any. Okay. We will have minutes the next meeting to approve, but we'll hold off and do that on July 20th. And then we have a number of adjournment requests. So I'm going to deal with those first. Looking then for Mr. David Stone, who is the agent on 250 Alfred Street. Good evening, Mr. Stone.
Hi there. Good evening.
So you're aware that there is a request for adjournment on your application?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Do you want to just give us a couple of sentences about the reason, the purpose for the adjournment?
Sure. We had a number of pre-consultations with the DIO and planner on this project. We did feel, at the time when we made our variance application that our request for variance were in keeping with, the nature and the context of the neighborhood and then the intentions of the Planning Act. But we did get some feedback in advance of our hearing last week from Ms. Cass-Lazaro, and we had a number of meetings with her, and we've decided that we are going to make some minor adjustments to our variance application. So we're just working with the owner of the project now to look at a slight reduction, possibly in the size of the outbuilding. And we're going to likely remove our variance request for having a home-based business based out of that outbuilding as well. So we will be coming back to the committee with some adjustments to our application.
All right, thank you, Mr. Stone. Any questions from the committee for Mr. Stone? All right, I'm going to just ask if there's anyone in the audience who would like to speak to the committee on the adjournment request. It's an adjournment for sine die. Anyone? No, not seeing anybody come forward, so I think we can actually go straight to a vote on this then. Members of the panel, all those in favor of an adjournment sine die on this application? All right, for the record, the application is unanimously adjourned and sine die, and we're going to wish you good luck, Mr. Stone, in revising your applications. Ms. Willis.
I just wanted to make a comment to Mr. Stone. I was just going to recommend to him that based on the nature of the variances, which without recognizing at first that this was going to be adjourned, I found that the justification for the 4 tests of the Planning Act to be very scant. It looks like, to me, it's sort of the conclusion that it meets the 4 tests, but without any sort of meat in terms of what the rest of the neighborhood looks like and that sort of thing. So I'd recommend when you come back that you focus more on making a more fulsome rationale in support of the variances, please.
Okay, noted.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the feedback.
All right, thank you, Mr. Stone. All right, that brings us to our second adjournment request for the evening, looking for Mr. Peter Hume. And this is on 958 Fisher. Good evening.
Morning, Ms. Chairman.
We're in the evening. I'm not sure what I heard, but
It's been a long day.
Okay, I can appreciate that. I've had those days.
Yeah.
All right. So Mr. Hume, so we're a little confused because
Okay.
you've got a request for adjournment on the consent, but not on the
Yes.
minor variance. But the minor variance still speak to lot frontage and lot area. All
So,
right. Do you want to explain this to us?
yeah, sure. And Ms. Liebman is here assisting me if there are questions that involve some of the easement that's on the southern side of the property. So, Madam Chair, I would agree with you that consideration of if we're not doing the consents, there is no requirement for lot width or lot area consideration. However, out of an abundance of caution, we've been advised to keep those variances because there's a section in the zoning bylaw that says the minimum lot width, lot area, and parking requirements for linked attached dwellings and semi-detached dwellings shall apply to each portion of a lot on which each individual dwelling is located, whether or not the parcel is to be severed. So I would make the argument that I can draw a severance line and sever those, and show that we meet both requirements. However, it has been, when you go to building code after you filed your, they're looking for, I forget, Ms. Liebman, what it's called, the most direct severance line.
It's either the most direct or the most obvious, the usual, which would be probably down the middle of the property. And in this
Right.
case, we're offset.
So, so out of abundance of caution and not wanting to get caught up in building code services, we're asking for the committee to consider the lot area and lot width variance.
In
All right,
particular, you reference is section 161, sub 10 of the zoning bylaw.
Yeah.
So if I'm understanding this, in order to get your building permit, you still need to get these minor variances. Is that correct?
That's what we've been advised on other files, yes.
Yes, that's what, yes.
Okay.
And the only reason,
That was a really soft yes.
the only reason we say that is because we're, in our opinion, there's a difference of opinion between what the bylaw says and what the city is asking for. And, but rather than get caught up in a debate about what the bylaw asks for, it is simpler and more straightforward to seek relief from the committee. So that's what we're here to do.
So, Mr. Hume, are you ever going to come back with a consent application?
I don't know, actually. We've seen the 13 conditions, including, some of them, and it's not clear to us that it's not clear to us that we would be back, but we'd like to adjourn sine die in case at some point in the future we do, but at this point we're not sure.
So, Mr. Hume, so here's the discussion we had on this application, and it was, we actually think some of those conditions should be applied, and we would still be looking for an adjournment to give staff time to give us a renewed list of conditions to apply even to the minor variance. So if it's avoiding those conditions that you're looking for, not sure that's going to happen. So Ms. Libman, I see you raise your hand. Go ahead.
Yep, a number of the conditions would be required for building permit. For example, the removal of the dwelling unit, the removal of the accessory dwellings, possibly the character or cultural heritage impact statement, the tree planting plan, proof that the footings are not within the easement, respect for the easement. All of those will be required at the building permit stage. And with respect, we did advise staff on Monday that this was our plan in hopes that because I thought the same thing, maybe they would want to apply some of those conditions to the variance. And so we advised them on Monday of our plan. And Peter actually even said, hold off on issuing your new report because we might seek to adjourn the consent. And the report was issued without consideration for those conditions. So we feel that we offered that as an opportunity in the amended report, and the opportunity wasn't taken. So with respect, we would like to go forward on the minor variances, keeping in mind, of course, that consent is not required by the zoning bylaw.
No, we understand. We understand. So, okay, questions for either Mr. Hume or Ms. Libman from the committee members? Yes, Ms. Willis, go ahead.
I just put a candy in my mouth, sorry. Just so I understand, I suspected that was the case, that regardless of whether a lot is severed, that you need X meters of frontage per unit. But the wording, if you had not submitted for a severance application in the first place, would you be before us, forget the severance, just for a variance? And if you were, surely the wording of the variance would be different than the lot frontage because there's only one lot. So I'm wondering if we would be seeing you at all if there was no severance. And secondly, if you come forward for a severance later, getting permission for a reduced frontage for each of the units, will the wording of that be applicable to the lots as well when you come through for your severance for your lots? So I'm perplexed by this. That was one question. The other one was with respect to the condition, the conditions. I'm wondering whether, of course, I can't pull it out right now. There was a cultural heritage statement that was required as one of the conditions, and I don't know what prompted that and whether or not that's something that would automatically be picked up at building permit as well.
So two response, and I'll let Ms. Liebman jump in here, but we would be back before you because two of the issues, the rear yard and the height variances, were required to allow the development to move forward. We would probably be before you on the lot area and lot width variance because building code is asking us to demonstrate on the most normal line, not just demonstrate you have two equal lots. And in other files, and that's why we know this, we're arguing with them about the intent of that bylaw, and it has taken quite some time. So we would be before you. Now, to your other question, will the zoning bylaw change, and would that require, when you actually do come for a severance, will this variance be irrelevant at that time because the performance standards will have changed? That may actually be the case. And we've talked about, and Ms. Liebman and I on the other file we're working on have talked about that when that could change. But right now, if we were to submit for a building permit, building code services most likely would come back in absence of us providing any severance line or any dividing line between the units, and say to us, demonstrate to us that you can meet the 7.5 and the lot area variance or the lot area criteria. We believe we can, but in an abundance of caution, we're here before you.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions, Mr. Hindle?
But cultural heritage.
Oh, the cultural heritage. So good question. We don't, when you look, the cultural heritage impact studies are a requirement of the official plan related to, I think the wording is a development application, right? So most likely not get picked up by an application for a building permit. And I should tell you that it's a requirement of this official plan, but not a requirement of the new official plan. So, if we go forward with a consent, we have to do one now. But if we don't go forward and we go forward in a year or two from now, we don't have to provide that. And, that's time, and it's not inconsequential from a funding perspective.
Can I just ask one more? Sorry, I'm overstaying my welcome here. The other thing that occurred to me was that if the building is built and occupied prior to severance, then you're not going to be required to permit cash in lieu of parkland if the building's already occupied. And I'm wondering if that's one of the reasons why you're not proceeding with a severance at this time.
No, I wasn't aware of that. So,
And I actually, to the contrary, the cash in lieu is being reviewed, and it will likely be much higher if and when we were to come back.
Yet to be approved policy, is that?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, that's all I had.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Hindle. Back to you.
Sure. Yeah, I was just going to ask maybe the planner on the file, I think it's Siobhan Kelly, to address the question about the conditions and if you've thought about the conditions that you would suggest imposing if we were to proceed just as a minor variances without the consent.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. I did consider the potential that committee would consider the minor variance on its own and have compiled a short list of conditions that I think would be appropriate for the minor variance, being condition 2, the cultural heritage impact statement. It's my understanding that it would not be picked up at the building permit stage. And then I also identified condition 4 and condition 5, which speak to the existing easement. My thought behind that is to address some of the concerns that asset management has identified with the proposed walkway.
Okay, so you would be comfortable then if we were to proceed this evening just with the minor variances?
If that's the decision of committee.
Okay.
And we would
Or
want to address those conditions through that, through the
Yes.
hearing process.
I would expect so, yeah.
Because there's
I'm-
additional, like in my mind, there's additional conditions to be imposed, not just.
I'm happy to eliminate that
Noise
walkway.
attenuation study. There's all kinds of things here that I think would, the committee will need to talk about and possibly impose, which in my mind then comes back to original statement, Mr. Hume, about, you didn't like the 14 or whatever conditions there are. If at the end of the day, you're going to wind up with 11 out of the 14 or something, well, maybe not that, maybe half of them, whatever. Is that change your mind about actually moving forward with the severance application?
So I'm not interested in perfecting consents. So I don't want the process to perfect consents. It is now 9 to 10 months. That means this project won't happen this year and may happen later next year. So I'm not interested in, to be honest, going through that process to protect, to allow the consents to go forward. The minor variances we're looking for them mainly to accommodate this design, recognizing that we could go with a flat roof, which would not require a minor variance, and we could redesign the building to require no variances. We didn't think that was particularly right, but given the context of the street, but if we had to go back and do that, we certainly would. And if the issue is around the walkway, I'm happy to eliminate that walkway if that's the concern. But I'll ask the city to go make sure my neighbor removes his fence too, right? Which you'll see in my presentation is right on top of the easement. So, and which they have not seemed to have much of an issue with to date. So,
all right, I'll come back to my question. Anybody else in the committee have any questions? All right, so my other issue I have with this, Mr. Hume, is that if we approve the minor variances, then you wind up with minor variances, and you could literally, for lot width and lot area plus the others, that you could choose to, like, so how do we tie that? We'd have to tie it to plans, or because what I wouldn't want is that minor variance application to survive in any way if you don't propose with exactly what's before us, right? In terms of that semi-detached.
yeah, happy to tie them to plans, Madam Chair.
Okay.
So I will be straight up with you. The intent is, if we got a positive response today, we would go to building permit drawings right after this hearing, and hopefully we wouldn't get appealed. The intent is to be in the ground in September ish, recognizing that we have some servicing work needs to be done, not a lot, but servicing and grading. So our intent is to be in the ground sooner as opposed to later.
And you don't see that the fulfilling of any of these conditions, because that would have to happen, in any way might change the design of that site plan?
I guess my question is I'm going to go back and look at the conditions. The conditions were,
So you've got cash in lieu, cultural heritage impact, you've got tree planting plan, you've got, let's see, is this the one where it's the footings? I'm not sure about that one. Then you've got number 5, which deals with, like, you've got quite a few here that servicing plan that's normal, noise attenuation study.
well, you don't usually need a noise study when you apply for a building permit. And
Yeah,
I
so
would,
that might be one that we want to impose.
and I would eliminate the walkway. So I would commit today to eliminate that walkway, if that's the big concern of the city with respect to the easement. Because the easement is an agreement, and Ms. Liebman will tell you, the easement is an agreement that has both obligations and responsibilities, right? Both parties do. And it's our intent, and Ms. Liebman has been clear, you have to respect that easement agreement. So.
Okay, so Mr. White, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I'm pretty sure we heard from the planner that if in the event that we deal only with the minor variance application, that we would be dealing only with 3 requested conditions from the city, that being number 2, number 4, and number 5.
Yes, but as you know, the committee can have a discussion about whether or not we want to impose additional ones, right, Mr. White?
Yeah, but I'm listening to what the city deems appropriate, and all I'm hearing is 2, 4, and 5. Mr. Hume has indicated, I think, that item number 5, he would be prepared to eliminate this walkway that seems to be the issue, which presumably would do away with the need for condition number 5. I stand to be corrected on that. Then we're only dealing with condition 2 and 4. One is the cultural heritage impact statement, which, from what I hear as well, is under the new official plan would not be required if that's all we were dealing with. And then condition number 4, which is the footing, location of footings. I mean, that's a logical condition that you don't put footings on an underground easement. So I don't think the applicant would have any problem with that. So going back to the assumption that if we deal with only the minor variance aspect of this application, we would only have 2 conditions needed for condition number 2 and number 4. I'm not seeing an issue with that situation.
All right, okay. Any other comments from members of the committee? Mr. Handel.
Yeah, I would just align with Mr. White. I think we've got, what we need to be able to proceed this evening, and I don't see why we would need to adjourn the variances any further.
All right, so the other thing we talked about then is the actual withdrawal of that application then versus just adjourning it, right?
I'm happy to withdraw, Madam. Either
well,
way.
it makes more sense. If you're never going to, if you're not going forward, if it's not an adjournment, it's a withdrawal, right? If you're not dealing with it.
The money's spent either way, right? So, I'm not going to get that back. So yeah, I'm happy to withdraw the consent application. If that
Okay.
is, and
All
and
right.
I'm happy to provide a revised site plan to the committee that eliminates that walkway.
That would be a condition we'll have to add to the 3 or
Fine.
whatever we're talking
I'm
about.
fine with that, Madam Chair.
All right. Mr. White.
Madam Chair, sorry, I wonder if I could ask what the problem is with this walkway in relation to an easement, because it's not unusual to have, in my experience, not unusual to have walkways.
Mr. White, can we deal with that in the hearing then, rather than deal with it during the adjournment?
Sure. Sorry.
I was just thinking just want to keep to the vote on the adjournment, because we still have to do that, because that's, so we're going to vote on, I got to make sure we got this right. So if we vote on the adjournment, then for the consent. In reality, we don't need to vote on it. If we have, for the record, and I guess Mr. Belmar, I'm looking for your guidance here a little bit. So if that's the case, then there's no vote on the consent. It goes straight to a withdrawal. Is that correct? For the record?
Madam Chair, to make it formal, we'll need a written confirmation that the consent application has been withdrawn, but we have the agents undertaking to withdraw the consent application. So
we don't have to adjourn it. We don't have to deal with it as an adjournment.
you may want to adjourn it sine die in the meantime, but knowing that it will be withdrawn formally.
All right, let's do that then. So on the consent application, all those in favor of adjourning? Sine die. All right, so it looks like there is consensus among the members that we are adjourning sine die and awaiting written confirmation that you're actually withdrawing that application. So it's not an adjournment as such, it's off the books. We're not dealing with it. All right, so that means it leaves us with the minor variance application. My only question was, I'll be honest, I would have preferred to give staff some time to actually come back with a revised set of conditions. Like I'd like them to, really think about some of the different things that are in here. But I think I'm hearing from the panel members that they're quite happy to move forward and have that discussion as part of the discussion on just the minor variance application. Ms. Markovich.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to signal that I was aligned with that view that we should have been able to give the city a bit more time to think through those conditions, but I appreciate that the majority of members on this committee, I think, are leaning towards proceeding today.
All right, and I think that's fair. So in some cases, I guess it's not a dissent, but I guess the preference would have been to, in fact, instruct staff to come back with something that we could deal with that was maybe a little more thought through. But that's okay. So we're going to deal with this application. We'll bring you back a little bit later. In fact, you won't be that far off. We've got applications 2 and 3 we'll deal with first and then come back to, I guess in this case, it's only application number 5. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Before we go, because we have been dealing, we wanted to go with the, and you know what, I forgot to request this from the audience. Is there anybody in the audience who did want to speak to the adjournment request? That should have happened before our decision. Didn't see any speakers though, so. All right, okay. No one's coming forward to talk about the adjournment, so that's fine. The decision of the committee then will stand as an adjournment sine die on the consents. All right, okay, let's go to the other application. I just want to call down briefly and have a discussion about is applications for Hartley Avenue, 422. Mr. Cooper, are you available to chat about a potential adjournment? And I guess we're going to want to speak with Ms. Kelly too. Mr. Cooper.
Yes, hello, Madam Chair. Can you see me?
Yes, we can see you and we can hear you. So good evening.
Excellent. Good evening.
All right, so we're seeing that staff has concerns remaining on your application. And I think what they've signaled to the committee in their staff report, and you have read their staff report, Mr. Cooper?
Yes, I have.
They're suggesting that there's still some ways that we can improve the design of the site in order for everything to function a little bit better. So have you had those discussions with Ms. Kelly? Have you looked at the potential for either eliminating a parking space on site or doing any other adjustments to the site plan?
We did have a discussion prior to the previous adjournment. And so before the latest comments were circulated with the forester in order to discuss the forestry's concerns relating to this tree, because ultimately this is what the issue has become about, is the retention of a spruce tree in the front yard. And so we did have an opportunity to have a discussion. I didn't think there would be any need for an adjournment today. My thoughts were that we were going to move ahead with the application as filed. I think we have a case for our position, and I think that's what we're hoping to do today.
So we always are a little bit concerned when we see that staff has a report that signals to us that they have concerns with regards to, and trees have become a big issue, right? As part of the approvals of the Committee of Adjustment. It's very clear that we have to have regard to forestry's comments because of the tree cover, those kinds of things. It's in the official plan. So that is part of a very real consideration for the committee. So in terms of what they're saying is that tree number 1 is avoidable. And we are also hearing from staff in the report that there would be ways to modify the site in order to improve the situation. So what I want to hear from you, Mr. Cooper, is do you think you would benefit from an adjournment, another 2 weeks, to be able to speak with staff about some of those concerns and resolve them?
Honestly, Madam Chair, I don't know if there really would be any benefit, because ultimately, if what staff is looking for is for us to abandon one of the parking spaces for one of the semi-detached dwelling units, then I haven't had a chance to discuss it specifically with my client, but my feeling is that unfortunately, these semi-detached dwellings are not going to be saleable. The reality is they are not saleable without a provided parking, and I think it's unfortunate. We did make every effort, and I don't know if the committee understands extenuating circumstances. We made every effort early days in early December to consult with planning staff to come up with a strategy to retain the existing spruce tree, which would have we would have had to request an additional variance for an internal, a recessed carport and or a garage. And the response from planning at that time was that they did not support the proposal, and that because the zoning bylaw does not require vehicular parking for these dwelling units, that was the basis of planning's decision, was that because parking is not strictly required, that that by not providing parking space would satisfy the city. But the reality, again, like I have mentioned, is that these semi-detached dwellings will not be saleable without that provided parking. The other issue I think that should be considered is that we've all seen in this latest windstorm that trees are wonderful, but they're also a significant hazard and a risk to dwellings in that type of an event. And I'll actually reference a specific event for a project that was recently approved by this committee at 21 Girvan Avenue, where we went through extensive consultation with the city forester to retain some very significant pine trees, and the owner was very committed to doing so, one of which was in not the greatest of condition. So we made every effort to retain those trees. Sadly, during that great windstorm, 2 of those trees came down and caused significant damage to the existing building. Fortunately, nobody was injured. So I think we absolutely do need to make every effort to retain trees, but I don't think that applying the bylaw without consideration is necessarily to the best interest of the general public or to the city at large. Like I said, we did make every effort to come up with a reasonable solution early days, and it was refused by planning. And I think it's unreasonable at this time to come back and to be asked to make a major design revision when we're already significantly invested in developing technical drawings for this project.
All right, Mr. Cooper, you were not speaking with Ms. Kelly, though, were you? Who are you speaking with?
I have spoken with Ms. Kelly on multiple occasions.
Okay, but it's not in October, Ms. Kelly. I'm going to give Ms. Kelly a
It was
chance
not Ms.
to,
Kelly. No, it was the previous planner on the file. So it was not Ms. Kelly. Yes, I admit that is true. Ms. Kelly took on the file, and it was so it was the previous planner.
Yeah, I'm going to give Ms. Kelly a chance now to give her reasons for the concerns on the application. So Ms. Kelly, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. In terms of the staff report, we've indicated that we have concerns given the new official plan policy context. Recognizing that there's no parking requirement, staff felt uncomfortable suggesting that we would have no concerns. I'm not requesting an adjournment, merely pointing to the fact that there might be some concerns with how the application meets the 4 tests for the minor variance. I can speak to my previous conversations with Mr. Cooper, which also included Ms. Young, the infill forester. And Ms. Young was still of the opinion that we could save the tree number 1 as parking is not required, but we did have conversations offline that if the committee were to approve the application as proposed, Ms. Young would be comfortable with compensation.
All right. Okay. So that's what I wanted to get at. I wanted to see whether or not there is an opportunity here to revise the site plan, adjourn, so we could revise the site plan in order to meet some of the requirements. So, okay. And it sounds like you're telling me, and unfortunately, Ms. Young isn't here this evening, but apparently what you're saying is compensation would be sufficient for her, even given the concerns. Okay. Mr. White, you had your hand up. Did you want
to? Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sympathetic to the applicant's argument with respect to the marketability of the units in the absence of a parking space. If we look at numerous examples of this type of development in the rest of the city, and in particular in the suburbs of areas such as where I'm most familiar, Barhaven, etc. Units like this would typically be constructed on in a plan of subdivision in the same manner as is proposed, I think, on the site plan that's provided in support of along with this application. We've got the parking, the access driveways in the front. You've got a tree planted in front of each unit. In this case, we've got the advantage of being able to, I think, maintain a number of trees that are located in the rear yard area. I may have missed some as well along the peripheries, along the side property lines of the property. But in any case, I'm sympathetic to the argument with respect to the retention of the parking. I think we've heard from the planner that notwithstanding the provision in the bylaw, which I personally have a hard time understanding, it doesn't require parking for these types of units, that the city's not particularly opposed to the proposal as it stands today, and recognizing that there's some compensation that's going to be provided in terms of trees on the property. So I don't see a problem. I don't have a particular personal problem with the application as it stands.
Yeah, so we learned a couple of things. We learned first through this discussion that there's not that much willingness to go back and design the site in the ways that were proposed in the staff report. And we also learned from Ms. Kelly that compensation is acceptable to Ms. Young, not information that we had as part of the report, which then answers the question, do we need to adjourn or not? And the answer is no, we don't. So that's all I wanted to get at as part of this. So with that, then, Mr. Cooper, we will hear from you. You're quite a bit further down in the agenda, so it'll be a while before we get to you.
All right.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Okay, so that is it for the adjournments. So we're going to go then pretty much with the exception of the application on Rebecca, which I think we'll hold for last. I think we're going to go in pretty much the order of the applications, the way they came in. So we've dealt with number 1. It was an adjournment. So we're going to go to application number 2 and 3, looking for Mr. Segreto, and it's for 1335 Kitchener Avenue.
Good evening, Madam Chair. Michael Segreto.
Good evening, Mr. Segreto. I am going to read to you. So, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided to you as part of the application process and by the committee was posted on the subject property, and that it was there for the prescribed number of days before the hearing, and that it was clearly visible and legible for the entirety of that time? Do you either swear or affirm that to be true?
I swear it to be true.
All right, perfect. So with that, let me just go through some of these housekeeping things. So my understanding is with regards to the notice, we're amending actually the lot depth shown for parts 1 and 2 to 43.17 rather than 43.19. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And I don't believe there are any additional changes required to the notice. So with that, we're not requiring a presentation, Mr. Segreto, so I'm going to open it up to the members of the committee directly then for questions.
Yes,
either on the consent or on the minor variance. Mr. White.
Madam Chair, the planning report mentions the other than the variances that are applied for, that the properties meet all other zoning requirements, and specifically mentions lot area, but there's no indication of what the lot area requirement is under the zoning bylaw. Could I find out what that is, please?
Ms. Kelly, over to you.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. The requirement for the R1S zone, which is this zone, for minimum lot area is 360 square meters. So part 1 and 2, where the new dwelling is proposed, is 410 square meters. And part 3 and 4, which is the existing dwelling, is 526 square meters.
That's great. Thank you.
Any further questions, Mr. White? No? Okay. Any other questions on either the consent or the minor variance from the members? Mr. Hindle.
Yeah, I'll just ask the applicant, Mr. Segredo. So a number of the comments that we saw, there was some concern listed for the rear yard parking. Can you explain, I guess in this case, it was a way of avoiding front yard parking for the existing dwelling? Is that how you ended up with that configuration?
Absolutely. That was one of the reasons. The other reason was that we wanted to have more landscaping with respect to the new dwelling. We're reusing the existing driveway where the older house is to be retained. And the reason is that if we don't reuse the existing driveway to create a right of way to get to the back, we could not provide front yard parking for the existing dwelling as well. So that's the reason, basically for landscaping and for parking.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions from the committee? All right, Mr. Segredo, I just want to confirm as well that it's not just a consent. We're also looking to grant easements over part 2 in favor of part 3 and 4. Just want to confirm that with you.
That's correct, it is.
Vehicular and pedestrian access. Okay. And we saw that on the site plan. I just wanted to confirm that, in fact, that was part of the application. So with that, then, if there's no further questions, I do have somebody on the speakers list for this item. And that would be a Mr. Norman Payne, who is the representative for the Ridgemont Community Association. Mr. Payne, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. I was wondering if that was you.
Thank you.
So go ahead.
Sorry
then.
about that. I'm on the phone, so I can't see anything. I'll just get right to it. 1335 Kitchener abuts 3 properties that are directly behind on Potterburr Avenue: 1326, 1332, and 1338 Potterburr. The application to subdivide the property into 2 lots for the construction of a new detached dwelling with a reduced lot width, the existing dwelling to remain, only came to our attention on Tuesday, the 28th of June, and only after we asked for it. Even our councillor, Riley Brockington, was not provided with the details as late as 21 June or 27 June when he advised me to contact CFA. Usually our councillor has all the details in advance, and the city generally also provides them directly to our community association. Now, this is not in keeping with standard practice, which quite unnerved us, as documents were stamped by the city as early as the 31st of May, which left us only 8 working days to assess and respond and discuss this with the residents and other people in Broadway. So we promptly met with Tim Wilson of Mr. T General Contractors. I also contacted Michael Segredo through Siobhan and listed Mr. T, who's listed as an enterprise in the renovation and home improvements at 613-227-5062, acting on behalf of his daughter, Stephanie Morehouse Watson, who is the applicant. On Saturday, the 2nd of July, we went to do an on-site inspection with everything marked out with stakes and Dago plaint. Tim Watson indicated that his daughter, Stephanie, a realtor who lives on Kitchener near Bank, will either be renting out the old home and the new building or moving into part of the new residence and renting out her current recently renovated residence on Banff. Currently, a mother and child rent 1335 Kitchener from Stephanie. Now, Tim Watson also indicated he was planning on buying other properties in Elwood and would like to cooperate with Elwood's Ridgemont Community Association on future investment properties. On inspection at that site, Tim Watson showed us where there would be space for 2 cars to park on each side of the rear lawn, which would be paved over. Each 2-car paved section slightly offset from the other. Both paved areas are fairly close to the lot line of 1326 and 1332 and 1338 Paardeberg. One important detail is that we received 2 site plans with slightly different details. One showing parking for only 2 cars and another for 4. However, Tim Watson emphasized that the 4-car option is absolutely his settled choice. Also on the site plan that I have here, where it shows 1 car behind the current building, there's actually a large deck there. It doesn't say anything about the removal of the deck, so if the deck is kept, that car parking spot would have to be moved further back into the yard according to the plan. So we are aware that shared driveways like this are a feature in Ottawa, and it's up to property owners to determine how best to manage. In some cases, multi-units on a shared access have joint use and maintenance agreements for snow clearing, repair, and so on. Our first-hand experience here in Elwood, and also while living in Sandy Head and the Glebe and hearing firsthand from other areas of the city, is that there are far more problems than one would like to admit or is widely known, especially in the very constrained situations like this one. And unlike the new developments with a lot more space, like, for example, Laurie Greenberg or down on Walkley, there are very few new builds with this type of constrained arrangement, most being in pre-1900 Ottawa sections. Invariably, these problems are not very pleasant and very stressful. This parking arrangement is a very difficult maneuver, especially in winter, with a very narrow lane between 2 buildings for 4 cars, as we've been told, and not always perfectly parked, and the concern is that more of the yard will become de facto parking. In Elwood, although there are no shared driveways, there are quite a few that are side by side, where many residents have problems with each other about parking and so on, and with quite a few single homes now turned into multi-unit rental properties, the problem is exacerbated, especially when there is no physical separating feature like a fence or a hedge and more cars than there is space to park. On paper, this type of parking arrangement looks feasible, but we find in practice it's quite different. We have about 550 homes here, 1,250 cars, averaging 2 cars per house. Many have 2, 3, or more. So the parking arrangement at 1335 Avenue, we believe, is an avoidable, ready-made problem we don't need here, especially as inevitably rental residents will have more cars than can be accommodated, and with more of the rear or the front lawn that may be used to park, as it is in some cases here. Already quite a sizable list of violations in Elwood has gone unaddressed for over 2 years with property standards bylaw. So you might say, oh yeah, you could contact bylaw, but nothing gets done. And in today's polarized and insular world where people are quick to take offense, you know the saying, good fences make the best neighbors, cannot be more true than ever. Now, checking with residents on Paardeberg who are aware of the new building, but totally unaware of any parking details on the paved over rear lawn, we found they don't want any cars, pollution, noise at all hours from slam doors, car radios, oil drip odors, noisy engines, slam trunks, security lock checking honks, and noisy engines being warmed in winter outside their bedrooms. So this lot is right across from their bedrooms and their relaxation area. Nor do they want a parking lot next to their space where they relax. This is their dream retirement home for most of them. Tim Watson also confirmed that he had not personally talked to the adjoining residents about parking and could not explain why he didn't. He did, however, indicate that he had discussed replacing the rear fence with them. He also indicated he was unfamiliar with a lot of the city process requirements and all the things that we were discussing about the objections to parking. So in regard to the opinion that a shared driveway leading to a single yard parking is pretty optimal in terms of impact on the street and walkability with one single access, which minimizes sidewalk crossings and maximizes on-street parking availability, it will be found that in this lot, in this case, is not applicable. As the sidewalk is on the other side, there's no issue of sidewalk crossings, and this does not maximize on-street parking, as there's presently no parking across the street from 1335 Kitchener, where Clifford Bowie Special Needs Primary School is located. In regard to the opinion that maintaining the tree canopy and planting a new front yard tree which lines up with our forest canopy objectives, it will be found that it's quite impossible that all the trees will survive the construction, given that the excavation hole is quite a bit larger than the building itself. And this just happened right here at 1967 Banff, where most of the trees got lost during the excavation for the foundation. And there will also be a sizable loss of green space with the rear yard paved over. In this context, City Planner Carol Ruddy acknowledged in the CB interview just the other day on the 4th of July that the cumulative effect of paving over lawns results in smaller lawns, fewer trees, and ultimately hotter neighborhoods. She also added that paving over lawns must be controlled to allow for proper drainage, winter snow storage, and other features. Now, most of all, this application flies in the face of the new official plan's concern that what is causing problems is the focus on using cars. Designing around cars, expecting cars to be the focus of design, and an environment that prioritizes cars above people movements, and that we should demand better environments for homes and people. That conflation between
I want to just make one clarification, Mr. Payne. So the application that is before us is 2 parking spots. We don't see paved over rear yards as part of the proposal.
No, for the big roll of the site plan that Tim Watson brought, and we have a witness, clearly had 4. We marked these 4 spots out on the lot.
All right, so let's get clarification from Mr. Segreto then on that, because that's definitely not the plan that's before us. So Mr. Segreto, what is Mr. Payne referring to? Because that is a concern if there's been plans circulated with.
I had a good discussion with Mr. Payne last week, and I explained him the application that is in front of you today. Out of respect, and as we normally do, we always ask our clients to talk with the abutting neighbors in the neighborhood. And we did send all our plans and all our presentation to Mr. Payne. He's well aware of it. I don't know what discussion Tim Watson had with Mr. Payne, because Mr. Payne really, he's innocent in all of this. He's new at this, Mr. Watson. He's trying to do a house for his daughter. Now, whether he said maybe in the future there may be a second parking or not, but originally what you have in front of you is 2 parking spaces, one for the existing house, one for the old house. If anything happens after the fact, I have no control over that. And
Mr. Segreto, your clients have to understand that the approvals are tied to plans. Right?
And I will absolutely make sure that he is aware of that and he understands that. And whatever is on the plans that we're tied to, he will do. I can guarantee you that that's what he'll do.
All right, Mr. White, have you got a question for Mr. Payne or Mr. Segreto?
More a comment, Madam Chair. There is a condition that's recommended in the staff report that addresses the question of parking, and it talks about registration of the legal agreement on title, which limits the parking to 1 parking space per unit. So, I mean, notwithstanding what plans are floating out there, if that condition is imposed, there will only be permitted 1 legal parking spot on each of the units.
Mr. Segreto, is your client aware of that?
The conditions, Madam Chair, as you know, I always respond to the conditions, and that's what I read as well. And if that's the case, then he'll be on the hook for 1 parking space per unit. That's basically it.
If I might interject, the neighbors there don't even want 1 parking space behind. They don't want cars. There isn't a single residence in this neighborhood that has a car in the rear yard, and we don't want it starting now.
All right, so hang on. So Mr. Segreto, I just want to get I'd like Mr. Payne. So Mr. Payne, is there any other comments other than the parking in the rear yard?
Yes, I can't emphasize the certainty which Tim Watson showed us these 4 spots near the back.
No, let's get off the parking. We've talked about the parking. At this point, I think any other issues, Mr. Payne?
There are, and people don't want these cars in their rear yard where they can, have all this disturbance from them. We have no objection to the building itself. You know why? Because the official plan, and we've talked to planners and worked with them very closely. Essentially, they say, look, you know what? We're prepared to put up these infill buildings and tell anyone who's buying with your eyes wide open, there's no cars here. You walk. And this is a 15-minute neighborhood in the new official plan, where walking to all these places around here is highly encouraged and made possible. There's 12 bus stops, there's an LRT station, there's the OC Transpo, so there's no need for cars. And this thing flies in the face of what the OP is suggesting.
All right. Any other
We don't
concerns
want
with regards to either the consent or so we've talked about cars, we've talked about parking. Anything else, Mr. Payne?
Other than that, we have no objection to the building.
All right. Okay, thank you.
It's not, if I might, this issue of the shared driveway, it also, in a way, prevents first-time home buyers from buying affordable homes, because who would want to buy a home with a shared driveway? It's a real,
Okay, that's not before us. So
I know, but that you guys you have this rosy image of how things will unfold, but in reality they don't. And I can tell you firsthand, most of the time they don't, and we're stuck picking up the pieces and living with the misery.
Mr. Payne, there's examples throughout the city with shared parking. You can walk through the Glebe, you'll see multiple
but those
examples
houses were
of
made
that.
before cars were constructed.
So you see the rear laneways where people have parking right next to their outdoor amenity space in the rear yards. So I would tell you there are examples of that throughout the city.
Yeah, but those are homes that were built when horses and carriages were parked in that back lane. I lived in the Glebe in Sandy Hill. I know what you're talking about. They were not for cars. It became like that. But we've got a neighborhood here where that's not going on.
There's new neighborhoods that are doing the same thing, I can assure you. All right, so with that, then I'm going to make a call out for anyone else in the audience who might have an interest in either the consent application, the minor variance application, or both. And if you'd like to address the committee, now's your chance. All right, I'm not seeing anybody else come forward. So with that, the public portion of this application is closed. So Mr. Segreto, then I think we heard a number of things as well. Just going back to a couple of things raised by Mr. Payne. When you suggested that you had provided all of the materials to them, was that on that June 28th or was it earlier than that? What's your recollection?
It was June 28th. I sent him the whole package that I normally send to the committee. So he saw all the latest ones, yes.
Okay. So in fact, there was no opportunity for them to have it before then. Okay, the only other question I have for you, and I did notice on the site plan, Mr. Segreto, that one of the spaces on the lot, and let me get the plan out here. One of the spaces on the lot, the existing lot with existing house, is stepped back fairly far from the back of what looks to be the house. Is that because of the deck that Mr. Payne was referring to?
I believe it is, and we're trying to keep the parking space as far away from the back as we can. Like with the existing house, Madam Chair, there's an 80-foot rear yard setback. With the new proposed house, there's a 50-foot setback. So there's plenty of space. We've done as much as we can to keep those parking spaces as close to that.
I just want to understand the deck. Understand the deck is what I wanted to understand. Okay. And my final question for you then, Mr. Segreto, it has to do with the easements, actually. So in this case, if I were trying to back up into my parking space without having to back up from the street, have I got enough room? Like, have you looked at the vehicular motions for in and out of? I'm presuming those spaces may someday they could have a garage, I suppose. But can you actually back into those spaces without having to go further than the part 2 and part 3?
Madam Chair, I honestly believe that there's enough room there that you can turn in and you have enough width on these lots that you can back up and then get out in a forward motion. There's plenty of backyard there plenty of
Okay, so
backyard.
normally we do get some turning radiuses on these things, Mr. Segreto, to be able to demonstrate the feasibility of these parking spaces in the rear yard and how you can do that without further, because it's great that you have these easements for exactly the reason that we're looking for, but I'm just trying to get some evidence that that's sufficient. That's all.
Okay.
And so you didn't undertake the exercise. It's your experience that's talking, not an actual. Okay.
Normally we do it, but in this case here, we didn't do it. It's been a frustrating year with COVID, with staff.
All right. Okay. Any questions from the committee on either the consent or the minor variance? Okay. Well, in that case, I think we can go to a vote on the consent application. So all those in favor? All right, so for the record, Mr. Segreto, the application is, the consent application is approved. And on the minor variances, and you've read through all of the conditions, Mr. Segreto, are you good with everything? I forgot to ask you that before we went to, okay, you're good. All right. So on the consent, so we've got, hands up again, sorry about that. So, all right, so we're all in favor of the minor variance being requested here. We are tying specifically to plans on this. I guess just one other little question I meant to ask you earlier. Had you or your client considered those parking spaces that are not paved? You know, you've suggested them to us before, Mr. Segreto, which are the ones that have the vegetation that can come through and it's a little less.
You know,
had you considered that?
I can absolutely ask them about it. You know what I mean? If it makes things a lot better, I'm sure that you know what I mean.
Just a way to try and reduce the
impact of it. I get it. I understand.
Mr. White?
Yep, Madam Chair, with respect to the this parking spaces with the grass that grows up through them, I'm not sure that there is a substantial benefit in that type of material. I mean, let's face it, the thing that's the object of chagrin on the part of people is not the surface that it's on, it's what's on top of the surface, and that's the location of the vehicle there. So I'm not exactly hung up on the concept of this permeable pavement concept, but I understand where it's coming from. It's just I don't think in terms of visual impact really does much in terms of benefit there.
And you may be quite right, Mr. White. It's just that we have seen this as a solution to reduce the impact on the greenery in yards, or whether it's in the front or in the back. We've seen this even proposed in the front in the past, and Mr. Segreto. So that's why I was suggesting it, is to see whether or not there would be a way to just not eliminate the impact, but rather maybe mitigate it a little bit. So, Mr. Segreto, so you haven't spoken to anybody about it. So at this point, we'll just tie it to the plans the way they are. Okay. All right, so with that, it is unanimously granted as well. And I think that's all we need to discuss with you this evening then, Mr. Segreto. Are you back on another application? I don't think so, eh?
I'm not. No, thank you so much.
Not. It's an early evening for you for a change. All right, well, enjoy the rest of the evening then.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.
All right, so that takes us back to applications 4 and 5. Well, 5. So for the record, we've already adjourned 4, so we're back to 5. So Mr. Hume and Ms. Libman, if you want to come back, that would be great. Mr. Hume, I'm going to read to you.
Yep.
All right. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided to you as part of the application process and by the committee was posted on the property to which the application applies, that it was there for the prescribed number of days prior to the hearing, that it was clearly visible and legible for the entirety of that time? Do you swear or affirm that to be true?
I swear that to be true, Madam Chair.
Okay, perfect. Now let's see if there's any changes to your notice, and there is. So let's go through those housekeeping items. So under the purpose of the applications, my understanding is that we need to strike the word dwelling and replace it with principal dwelling unit. Do you agree with that?
I suppose so, yes.
Have you not had a chance to see these in the, I think they were in the staff report. They're normally itemized in the staff report.
Right, I'm looking at this.
And you know what? I don't see that in the staff report. Hang on. Maybe I'm not on the right page. Okay, hang on. No, I'm not seeing it. So it is on my summary page. So who are we speaking with here? I just want to confirm it then. Ms. Kelly, do we need to amend the purpose of the applications? Because it wasn't in your staff report. The other modification that we'll come to in a minute is, but not that.
And it is in the staff report, Madam Chair. It's on,
It is? Okay.
on the revised staff report
Yes.
dated July 4th.
Yep. Each dwelling.
That's interesting. I didn't know there was a revised report on this one at all.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. In that case, Mr. Hume, I assume you maybe have the same staff report I have then.
Yeah, so I agree with you, Madam Chair. They're changing it from multiple dwelling units to a single dwelling unit, which is fine with me. And I think the next change is the address, right? So
Yeah, so I just want to make sure that we have that right too. So on the notice, I think the way that it's, all right. So we've got 556 and 556B, and we have 580, no, sorry, 56 and
9,
58. Or 58 and then 58B, right?
Right.
So the notice has to refer to, and I think it does. So the changes that we're looking for part 1, that's the reference to 956 and 956B. And on part 2, we have 958 and 958B. Just want to make sure that we're correcting that.
Okay.
Are you in agreement?
Yes, Madam Chair.
All right. All right, and that's all we need to do because we don't need to worry about the first application because it's gone.
Right.
Okay, great. I think that's it. I don't think there's anything else we need to change in the notice from a housekeeping standpoint. All right, I'm just trying to decide. Committee, would you want a presentation on the minor variances at this point? It might be beneficial, Mr. Hume.
Sure, I'm ready for you, Madam Chair.
Go ahead then.
Okay, we've provided a deck just to discuss the minor variance applications for the 2 semi-detached dwellings. Don't know if you can you see that on your, I can't see that on my screen yet.
Not yet. It hasn't been shared.
Sorry, what was that you wanted to share there?
The presentation, I believe. It was submitted. All right, and I think we want to go straight to just the minor variance.
Yeah. So the minor variance. So these are just, so there you go. That's the context. There you go. That's the context of the location, just north of the access to Shillington, on Fisher Avenue, overlooking sort of a triangle piece of land between the Farms Park roadway system right across from the walking trails. If you'd like to go to the next slide. And so there's the house. If you can see, it's a white house, and you can see the new build, which was the genesis of the easement agreement back in the early 90s. And it runs sort of in the middle of the 2 dwellings. In fact, the neighbor has quite generously put a fence on the easement. So that's looking straight on to the property. And I thought that it would be most of the context changes as you move southward, and I want to show you that. So if you want to go to the next slide. So there you go. I'm sure you're a little bit surprised at that. That's so 960, 962 Fisher is the semi-detached that I just showed you. Right next to that, the three preceding properties have been rezoned to allow for small apartment buildings. And those were the designs that were the subject of the rezoning, which was approved and is final and binding. It was approved in December 2019. And there is the, and right next to that is 982 Fisher, which is the house on the corner of Shillington and Fisher Avenue. So you kind of get the context of that street. And I think that it's important for you to understand that when we go to the minor variance with respect to height. So if you want to go to the next slide. So the minor variance requests were lot width and lot area, rear yard depth, and building height. So we prepared a reference plan based on our experience of late with building code services when they were seeking to provide or seeking for demonstrations that your proposed semi-detached would meet the zoning requirements along sort of what they were considering would be a normal severance line. We prepared this severance plan. As you know, the entire lot is 16 meters wide. It has a lot area 488.2 square meters. As you know, the R2 zoning criteria require a 7.5 meter lot width and a 225 meter lot area. And we could meet those standards with some minor adjustments. In fact, if we were so what we're seeking is at least on the to vary the lot width requirement for part one or for a portion of the property to 7.37 meters and 224.5 is it 54 or 64 meters, and they're very minor. You know, they have no impacts on abutting properties or the streetscape. And you know, given that the discussion around the easement, they're quite moving the buildings further away from the easement and creating and demonstrating that lot. I think it's good planning and design. So if you want to go to the next slide. Now the rear yard variance is a little different, and the rear yard variance has its genesis in the requirement to be out of the easement. So so you need to be clear, your building needs to be out of the easement. So you can't have window wells that encroach into the easement. You can't, and as we know, the city's concerned about footings. So in order to provide secondary dwelling units, we had to come, the building, of course, has to move over, and it has to come out of the ground. So it gets smudged, so it gets a little longer, and it rises out of the back. But in the case of both areas, we're able to meet the area requirements of the standard. So it's lot depth and lot area. And so we're able to meet both of those, both units have spaces that would conform to the zoning bylaw. And when you look at impacts on neighbors, really a very minor, the very minor impacts, if there are impacts at all. You can see where the southern neighbor, the end of the southern neighbor's building is located, right on the easement, and they're very close to each other. So you're not getting, you should have, because you have a reduced rear yard area, or reduced setback, any impacts on abutting property owners. If you want to go to the next. So this is really when we start to talk about the height variance, which is where I thought we'd have most of the discussion. This was prepared before we amended our plan. The roof no longer has the gables at the top. It's strictly a peaked roof, but it gives you that streetscape in context. It's not going to be the highest along the street, and it's not markedly different from the streetscape that you see that you will see along Fisher Avenue in that context. And the other thing is that because of the way the building is designed, it doesn't increase over the height increase doesn't increase overlook or impacts on adjacent properties, because the two-story windows, they remain below the height limit. So you're not increasing the height so that you can provide overlook into our rear neighbors. And our rear neighbors are actually they're pie-shaped lots, so they're quite set back from us. But we have no overlook issues. The habitable space that's contained within the roof is all at the front of the property and overlooks the experimental farm. So that's the context of the streetscape. We believe that the changes are minor. They're in keeping. So if you want to go, we want to talk quickly about the 4 tests. So, we're the reduced lot width and lot area. It is very minor. The OP encourages, or the general intent and purpose of the official plan, the development is permitted in the general urban area. The zoning bylaw, these are very minor modifications to the zoning bylaw. The general intent of size and width are maintained, and they're very similar to, in fact, our lot widths would be a little wider than our neighbors to the south of it. Is it appropriate development? I think the answer to that is yes. It's ground oriented. I think that people, ground oriented housing is a desirable form of development, and I think that the request's minor. In terms of the rear yard, the rear yard allows for the development of ground-oriented housing that's in keeping with the intensification goals of the current and official plan. The general intent of a rear yard to function as a green area or an amenity space is maintained. It meets the area requirements. The proposed semi-detached uses allow for appropriate amenities for all users, and the proposed is actually quite small, 0.88 of a meter. So it's not going to, it doesn't bring the house markedly closer to the neighbors. It doesn't provide any impacts on either our rear or side yard neighbors, and it's not noticeable. It will not be noticeable when you're in the back in the rear yard. And the last test is with the increased height. The increased height, it's semi-detached are permitted uses within the R2 zone. It's consistent with the evolving streetscape along Fisher Avenue. The design actually is more appropriate. The building could be built with a flat roof and meet the existing zoning, but an alternative roof line is more consistent with the neighborhood and the streetscape. And is it relatively minor? I would say that there are no impacts on abutting neighbors, and as a result, I think the request is minor, and it creates a desirable housing form in that location.
All right, I'm just going to ask you to, let's go, if there's a site plan, it would be good to see a site plan come back up, because you had mentioned in earlier discussions this evening that you
Yeah.
were willing to, all right.
So there you go. I don't have a site plan for you, but if you want to go back to the, picture, we can, so the picture shows, yeah, the front. No, keep going. There you go. The first page. There you go. So what we're, one more or two more, I guess. There you go. So what we're talking about, Madam Chair, is so the concern on the behalf of the city is if you look to the left, it's with the walkway that runs down the side of the building there. So we would, I would stop the walkway at the end of the steps, and it would be green, and we would rejig the rear to provide, well, I mean, we don't need to rejig it, but we would provide access along the southern side of the building.
All right, okay, just wanted to make sure.
Sorry, the northern side of the building.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hume. Mr. White, I see your hand is up.
Madam Chair, while we're on the subject of this easement, I wonder if we could get a little more information on exactly what that is. Is it underground? Is it underground infrastructure? Is it an access easement for whatever reason? And who are the benefiting parties here? It appears to me that if there are pipes in there, that they probably service lots to the rear of the subject property, but it's not clear in any report that I've seen. Could we get some clarification on that? And again, I'm wondering why the concern with respect to a paver stone walkway, which only obstructs the few inches of the surface of the property. And if there is work required to be done in an easement like that, it's not unusual for those types of things to be taken up and replaced after the work is done. I think I'd like to hear some more explanation of the nature of that easement.
Can I just ask the coordinator to give us the gallery view, please? All right, thank you. So are you asking Mr. Hume or are you asking Ms. Kelly that question?
Whoever can answer the question of the nature of that easement.
Mr. Hume and Ms. Lindman.
So Geo Ottawa, although it's not, you're not to rely on it, it shows it to be a storm sewer running through the property to the back units. Ms. Liebman may be able to talk to you more about the rights and obligations. So.
Yeah, so there is an easement agreement on title. It's quite detailed, and so without getting into the whole thing, there are responsibilities on both sides. So from the homeowner to respect the city's infrastructure and not to damage it, And from the city, the same way, to respect the homeowner's assets and to provide actually access to the property. So I'll just actually scroll down to one of the paragraphs here, which is number 4 in the easement agreement, which is that the transferee, being the city, shall ensure that during construction, repair, and maintenance of the utility, the lands shall not be obstructed so as to preclude access over the lands. So access needs to be provided. I mean, perhaps Ms. Kelly can go over what the city's actual concern is, but I'll just also say that, of course, the transferor, being the homeowner, has the responsibility to respect the easement, not to build anything permanent on it, not to build anything that they're not aware would have to be removed for repairs. And yeah, this is all covered in the easement agreement. I would say that there's no need for the condition about the footings because it's just, that's a fact. The footings should not be built, cannot be built. The permit cannot be issued if it shows the footings over the easement. In terms of condition 5, which was the development agreement, if Mr. Hume removes the walkway, then obviously there's no concern about the walkway.
Right,
But
Ms. Lippman,
if
can we come back to the conditions after we get through some of the issues? So yeah, so I appreciate what you're saying and we understand. I just want to hear from Ms. Kelly in terms of some of the concerns.
that's good. We all get on a roll.
It's okay. Go ahead, Ms. Kelly.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Chair. So I was advised by the city's legal counsel and asset management that their concerns weren't about the access, but more so addressing responsibilities with, would the city be responsible for reinstating that walkway? And so that's where the intent behind having a development agreement, so condition 5, came into play.
All right, thank you very much for that. Okay, was that, I think it was your question, Mr. White, is this, I'm just trying to remember where we.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't understand the issue with respect to the walkway. It's not unusual to have walkways over these types of easements. I think the existing easement agreement, from what Ms. Lippman said, provides sufficient protection for the city. I'm not understanding, and particularly in the situation we have just across the property line, where it looks like the property owner Jason has already built a fence, which quite frankly is, I would suggest it's probably permitted by the easement agreement as it stands today, but that represents a much more significant impediment on the easement than the simple paver stone walkway that's proposed.
Okay, agreed. Okay, Ms. Markovich.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I had a couple of questions. You had some discussion around impacts on neighbors. You talked a bit about the context and the streetscape, and I think a lot of that seemed to focus on the areas to the south of the subject property. And I was wondering if you could provide a similar type of discussion and analysis of the areas to the north of that subject property. If you happen to have that in your presentation.
Yeah, so the north doesn't change markedly from the existing dwelling. So the existing dwelling, which is a series of wartime homes, it's a similar streetscape as you move north on the property. And we've had some discussion, or we did have discussions before we filed this application with the heritage people, because this is on the very edge of the new heritage or veterans heritage area. And so we had discussions about how our development would fit into what they were proposing. And I would suggest to you, honestly, that if this were 4 houses down, 4 houses south, it probably would run afoul of the majority of those guidelines. But because it's next to the, it's at the end of the sort of the area, the focus was the city said, well, you understand, we understand, and we're not going to oppose your demolition and moving forward. So we focused on what we felt was would be the most appropriate context, which was to the south, because there is not, as you enter the Heritage District, it's not necessarily as, there is not context to, in my opinion, support. As I said, it would be difficult to support even a dwelling like that, I think, if you were 5 or 8 houses in.
Okay, no, thank you. And I had another sort of related question, I guess, around impacts and potential impacts on the neighborhood or neighbors. I'm just wondering if you could talk through a little bit about your approach to engaging the community and speaking with those neighbors in the surrounding area.
So we've, when we purchased the property, we reached out to the neighbors, and we didn't hear anything actually from anybody.
And sorry, when did you undertake that reach out?
Good question. It was in the very beginning. We bought the property in April, I think. So it was in the very beginning. We are the new owners. So, but we've heard nothing through this process, and nothing in response to the neighbors, which I thought was a good thing. But
okay, so I just want to confirm, when you said that there are no impacts on abutting neighbors, that's not based on hearing from those neighbors. It's just sort of, okay.
No.
I just wanted to confirm that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Any other questions from the committee? All right. In that case, I think I'm going to go straight to the public portion. I don't have anyone registered to speak, but is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak to this application now for just minor variance? 958 Fisher Avenue. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody come forward. So I think the next thing we need to do before we go to a vote is talk about those conditions. And to be honest with you, I think at this point, what I'd like to do is go through them one by one, and let's do the process of elimination and see what we're left with. So on the cash in lieu, without the consent, as far as I know, there's no way for us to impose. Is that correct? Ms. Kelly, I saw you nodding. Is that, did you check that with legal services, by the way?
Yes, so it can only be imposed through the consent.
Okay, so not number one. Number two, we could impose the cultural heritage because it will not be caught. I think we heard earlier by the building permit process,
Yes,
correct?
that's my understanding.
Okay, so we're going to put a check mark next to 2. 3, we've got showing location. Okay, but tree. So we're asking that a tree planting plan. We can ask for that, correct?
I was not able to confirm whether this could be applied to the minor variance due to Miss Young's absence this week.
Well, so here's the thing. So in my mind, we can impose a development agreement, and that development agreement can probably contain a number of things. So of which this would be one. Yes, Ms. Libman, go ahead.
Yeah. Well,
we don't have legal advice, but
the trees will be captured at the building permit stage, and really a development agreement lately through legal services is taking months. And I don't think it's appropriate for the tree planting plan, which would be captured through the building permit process.
All right, then in my mind, absence of a legal opinion on this, and I appreciate the development agreement process, although there are other things in here that's a development agreement. So I would suggest we don't have Ms. Young to give us that advice. So let's impose it. And if it falls off, then it falls off. But it is a recommendation of staff to have that tree planting plan. And I don't know what the difference is between what they do at building permits. So at building permit, do they ask for a tree planting plan? Or do they just look to see which trees would be affected, and then there has to be under the bylaw permits applied for? There's a difference. I'm just need to understand.
I guess the thing is, though, we're here for a minor variance and not a consent
Yeah.
application.
I know.
And so I would ask you to proceed as if the consent had not been before you because it has been formally withdrawn by Mr. Hume.
Okay, we still have the same development before us, so Ms. Libman, as a planning result. It's still the same thing that's in front of us.
Well,
So, other than the
it isn't.
application,
Yeah.
in terms of the impact, in terms of what the result is of this decision, it will result in exactly the presentation that Mr. Hume just gave us. So these, regardless of so some of these things, of course, are brought up by staff because they have concerns about some of these things, right? That's all I'm suggesting in here. So I think we should go through this list and pick out what we're going to do. So I'm still trying to understand the tree planting plan. We don't have an answer here, unless Ms. Kelly, you can tell me what the difference is between what's captured for trees at building permit versus a tree planting plan.
My apologies, Madam Chair. I'm unaware of what the difference would be at this time.
I'm going to tell you, I'm happy to plant a tree, and I will plant a tree, and I will submit to the committee a plan that shows a tree planting. As Ms. Lidman says, a development agreement is right now incredibly onerous to get out of the city, and it costs as much as planting the tree. So, you know,
you just want to go ahead and plant the tree.
Honestly, I just want to plant the tree. And you know, I have another application. Madam Chair, I'll remember this because I have another application where is coming to you, and rather than worry about entering a development agreement, we've already contracted with the trees, so we can get them in now, so we can say the trees are there. We don't need a development agreement. You know, it is an onerous process at this point.
Mr. White, you had your hand up. Now you put it down. I was getting to you. So.
Yeah, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, yeah, I sympathize with the concern over the development agreement, and I don't believe, in my view, that one is necessary. I think we can condition a tree planting plan to the satisfaction of the department. As Mr. Hume has indicated, he's prepared to prepare. Also, with respect to the development agreement, and it specifically addresses, I think, the issue of the easement. I'm not supportive of additional development agreement for the purposes of that easement, because there is already a registered easement document that favors addresses the interests of the parties, being the city and.
All right, so we're at what so I was going to go to number 4 next, which has to do with the footings, which I think we heard from Ms. Libman, because of the agreement that's registered on title and is fairly detailed, already provides all the protection that we need. Don't actually need this footing one to be added, right? Are we in agreement on that? Anybody opposed on the committee to eliminating 4? No? All right. Development agreement, we're talking here about number 5, specifically to do with that walkway. And Mr. Hume has suggested that in order to get away from that condition, he's willing to remove the walkway, which means he's revising his plans.
Yeah, and I'll submit a revised site plan to the committee showing that walkway being eliminated.
No, it's going to turn up someday, that walkway, right? It's going to turn up one day. Okay, so number 6 has to do with, all right, let me just catch up here again. The existing dwelling being removed. I believe that is building permit. Ms. Libman, can you confirm that?
Yes.
Willis is, okay, so we don't need that one. Number 7, we're talking about, again, independent services as building permit. Don't need to worry about that. Number 8, noise attenuation study. So we need a little more information about this, because it is a condition and we will have new residents. So they talk about a noise attenuation study. Is there an agreement in here? Did they ask for an agreement? The owners will enter an agreement. So we do have a development.
There's always an agreement with.
There's always an agreement.
With the noise study, yeah, they enter into a development agreement, you put it on title.
Yeah, so is there a way to get around that? Still have the noise attenuation study done for the purposes of ensuring that the building permit reflects the recommendations of that study.
Well, I recall there was a time when folks were saying, we'd rather put the money into putting the better windows in and putting in the air conditioning than doing the study when we know what the study will say. And there was a time when the city had recommendations, and if you were willing to abide by those recommendations, then a study wasn't required. Is this ringing a bell to anyone?
Yeah.
And so I think certainly, I'm sure Mr. Hume would be pleased to meet those requirements for the enjoyment and comfort of his tenants or future residents. But again, I think a development agreement on a minor variance application for a noise study is extra.
So the purpose to the development agreement was always that you would have these recommendations, and then it would, the way it would work is because you can't actually build the house and then get the consent, but we're not concerned about this, clearing the condition in time. So it's not a horse before the cart issue in this case at all. Because we're not doing the consent, we can essentially say, we need you to do the study. So that would be part of just ensuring that you're consenting that you're going to have it done, and you're undertaking that you're going to have it done, and hopefully you're moving this all in, or using the recommendations to inform your building permit. Ms. Willis.
I recall well what Ms. Libman's talking about, and I don't see why in many other cases we've just used a condition that says that they will build the houses with capable of being air conditioned, and that the windows are of a certain state, and that the noise clause goes on title. I mean, that could be a condition without having to do a study.
And I agree. That's true. It's very true. There was that alternative. We don't have that here.
We could pull it out and just impose it, couldn't we?
Yeah, I think so. I don't have an issue with that either. But we need the wording for this. So all we need is Ms. Kelly, if you could find that condition that is not a development agreement that allows for that air conditioning unit to be added. So I'm okay with that. If that's fine too. So the only difference to me is that one really gets at what the building material should be and how it should be done. And the other one is an air conditioning unit to make sure that you're comfortable in your house if there's noise outside. And that's it, right? That's really what it comes down to. Okay, so we're going to replace 8, still though with the one, it will address the noise attenuation issues. So we're going to leave that with Ms. Kelly to provide that revised, and I think committee staff is well aware of that as well. So if you can provide that to committee staff, that would be fine. Then there's number 9 is an infrastructure agreement for the extension of municipal services. That'll have to happen.
I would say an agreement isn't required, because if extension of services is required, the services will be extended and Mr. Hume will pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we don't need that one. We agree. That's part of the development. It's not going to happen unless he does it. All right, number 10 has to do with an asphalt overlay.
And again,
we don't need a development agreement for that. We need an undertaking.
Well, for a certain number of accesses, I guess, and or curb cuts, which, because we're not severing, perhaps, I don't know if it would still meet the threshold, but certainly an undertaking would be preferable to an agreement.
Wouldn't that come up? Sorry, Madam Chair. Wouldn't that be triggered at building permit anyway, because it's a city requirement if there are 3 road cuts? So I think we can take it out.
All right, and are we sure about that? If that's true, then yeah.
I think I'm sure.
I think you're sure. We don't have building code services people to give us that. Yeah. So, but Kelly, can you just confirm that then? Oh, I just
that's right in the condition.
Can confirm it.
Yeah.
Ms. Kelly, can you just confirm that asphalt overlay will be covered?
Yes, Madam Chair, it's my understanding it will be covered at building.
All right, just good to have staff chime in. So, all right. Brings us to number 11, which is a joint use and maintenance.
That will be required.
Well, it's not required because it's all one owner.
Right.
So there's no one to enter into an agreement with or to protect.
Can't even be applied is what you're saying at this point. Okay. Number 12, grading and drainage, that'll be captured. Not worried about that. And then the last one has to do with the right of way, which I don't believe we can take without a consent.
No.
All right, what does that leave us with? Let's go back. That leaves us with Boy, there's a long list. All right, leaves us with number 2, 3, 8 being replaced. And then I think is that it? That's it.
Madam Chair,
Right.
question, Madam Chair.
Yes, please, go ahead.
I'm confused by this cultural heritage impact statement. If they had come in without the severance application and just the variance application, we probably would not have seen that because it's prompted by some form of development and the severance is the development. I don't know what the cultural heritage impact statement addresses, but I don't know that since they're only going for a variance at this point in time, if it doesn't come up at building permit, I can't see why we would be imposing it now.
All right, Ms. Kelly, can you shed some light on that for us then? What do we think is going to happen as a result of this cultural heritage impact statement? What value does it bring?
Yes, so through you, Madam Chair, my understanding is heritage planning staff have already been working with Mr. Hume on a scoped cultural heritage impact statement. It should be 1 page approximately and speak to how the proposed development might impact the designated property being the experimental farm next door. Member Willis is correct that the trigger is the development application. So in this case, heritage planning staff reviewed it because of the consent application. I'm not confident if it had just been a minor variance, if heritage planning staff would have been privy to the review. That being said, I don't believe it would be captured at building.
All right, so now we've got to talk about what's the value. So that 1 pager is going to give us what? Go ahead, Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I heard that the new official plan does not require these studies to be done, and that it's a remnant from the, I guess it's still in effect, but in reality, ultimately won't be the existing official plan. So I'm not seeing any, from what I've heard about the applicability to consent applications, which we're not dealing with. I'm inclined to suggest, why do we really need it? Unless Mr. Hume has already prepared it and he's happy to go ahead.
No.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm not. I have had a single contact with heritage staff that didn't lead me to believe that it was going to be an easy application, although we did talk about it being scoped. I'm trying to find the correspondence I had with the planner so that I can, but we did reach out to so yeah, it's terms of reference I think are generous. It just told me what I had to, and I'll read it, and I'm happy to read it to the committee. It's a scoped CHIS, and it should address existing landscape character, proposed landscape character, potential impacts to the character of the National Historic Site as designed by a statement of significance, the statement of commemorative intent, and the management plan, and any mitigation measures if applicable. And then I was provided a link to the full CHIS guidelines and a generous offer to a list of heritage consultants to prepare this document.
So it is, all right. And so I guess what I'm worried about here, Mr. Hume, is you will undertake that and then it'll lead to possibly some changes to your application. So I'm now thinking there's not a lot of value. Mr. Handel, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was
Oh,
just
sorry, now I have to go back to Ms. McMorris. Can I just skip you? Can I skip you with that, Mr. Handel? Because
Sure.
Ms. Markovich did have her hand up first. I'll go back. Go
Okay,
ahead.
I just have a quick comment, I guess, because given where the subject property is situated, I personally feel like some sort of cultural impact assessment is appropriate. I mean, this subject property is in a very particular character area within the city. It's not just anywhere in the city. There's been a lot of assertions today that this development has no impacts. And I feel like going through that other assessment sort of suggests otherwise. It introduces perhaps a more comprehensive understanding of what impacts actually comprise. But I'm just wondering if we can have a discussion within the committee perhaps around this, as opposed to turning it immediately back to an agent about a preference.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right. So I'll come back to you again, Mr. Handel. So for the rest of the committee members, and I'll go back to my original question. It's the value that would bring. What happens with that information, and who reviews it? And is it an approved document? I'm trying to figure that out as well. So, all right. So let's go with you, Mr. White, your thoughts on the cultural heritage.
Madam Chair, as I pointed out, I think we've heard that it's not a particularly relevant requirement in terms of the new official plan. Obviously declining in significance. There's already been development along this stretch of the road, as Mr. Hume's presentation has indicated, that is clearly of a similar character or higher density than what is proposed in this case. I don't see any value in the imposition of the condition.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Willis.
I agree with Mr. White. I think the reason that it's been imposed is because it's proximity to the experimental farm, and it's across, I think, an arterial road, or at least a major collector road from the farm. So as long as it's fitting within the variance tests for the variances, so that it would fit within the residential sort of character of the neighborhood, which is what's being demonstrated, then it's not going to be any more impactful on the farm across this arterial road than any other form of low-rise residential development. So I'd like to, in this case, since the severance has basically been withdrawn, go back to what we would have before us if they'd simply submitted a minor variance application. And I've never seen this one before. And we've done others on Fisher Avenue. I would say that we just delete it from the list of conditions.
All right, thank you. Mr. Handel, your thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, I think generally I'm in favor of dropping, I would say most, if not all of the conditions. I think in this case, because it was originally reviewed as part of a consent, there's a clear rationale for why some of these were created. But given that we are kind of looking at it now solely as minor variances, and given that it's very rare that we impose conditions on minor variances, and including in other neighborhoods, I would be loath to impose conditions that I think would be outside of our standard practice at the very least for what is just minor variances in this case. And when we talk about, say, the walkway on the private easement, that's something that to me is between two private parties. There is an existing easement agreement. I'm fine for the walkway to stay and provide access to a secondary dwelling unit. So I would tend to leave that to private parties and private discussions outside of this. And I'm wanting in my mind to think of this just as a minor variance. And to me, that would encourage, if not require, us kind of killing off, I would say, all of the conditions here.
All right, thank you, Mr. Handel. I'm just going to counter that because in my mind, there's nothing really all that straightforward about this application, because we did have a consent and it's been taken out, and we still have lot area and lot frontage and a bunch of other things that are being applied as part of this application. And we have heard that we haven't done it as a practice, but there is, the odd case where it is, it may be appropriate to impose conditions on minor variances. So, and I think it's important that we explored that and we had that discussion, which I think is great. And I think we've been able to identify a number of the ones that we want to go with. So the only one in my mind that's still left outstanding at this point is that cultural heritage. And I think, just for the record, from a majority standpoint, it's going to be eliminated, but I just, for the record, want to side with Ms. Markovich on this, because I think the intent really is to say, has the site that's been designed that Mr. Hume has brought forward to us taken into consideration some of the impacts that there could otherwise be on this cultural heritage area? And does the site reflect something that's a good fit with that, given its proximity? And we haven't heard, obviously we don't have that information, because it hasn't been done. Had we had the consent, we would have had that information before us. So would it be, in my mind, it would have been appropriate to impose it in this case based on that rationale. But we go with majority on this committee. So 3 against 2 means we are not imposing that condition. And I think I've read out all the ones that are relevant at this point. So I think we can go probably to a vote at this point. I'm going to leave the last word, Mr. Hume, Ms. Libman, anything else before we go to a vote?
I don't think so, Madam Chair.
All right. Oh, Mr. White.
I think member Kathleen had her hand up before I did.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Ms. Willis.
I didn't do it electronically. I just wanted clarification. Are we keeping in the tree planting plant, the requirement that
All right, so I have, the numbers I now have is 3, 8 is being replaced, and that's it. That's all I got.
and is the other thing that we were asking about was whether or not we were going to require the walkway to be removed in lieu of putting that condition in, or we just leave that up to when it goes for building permit, they'll say you can't build that walkway on that.
All right. I thought for the purposes of the site plan, we were removing it.
Okay, is Mr. Hume okay with that?
Sure. Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, if they want to do the walkway, it is, as Mr. Hindle said, they can still work that out, right? So it's not as if it's means that it won't be there, although it is supposed to be tied to plans.
Yeah,
So good. All right, we'll come back to it. Ms. Libman.
I was just going to say, with respect to being tied to plans, if it could be tied to the plans to the extent of the variances, being the lot width, lot area, rear yard, and height, as opposed to anything on the site plan that is not relevant to the variances.
All right, that works for me. Good suggestion. Thank you, Ms. Libman. All right, so on that then, let's go to a vote on the minor variance with the amended conditions. And all right, so I think that's what we're doing. All those in favor? All right, okay. I somehow thought this was going to end up this way. So, all right, so it obviously it's granted because we've got 3 of the members, but I think we've seen 2 dissents, mine and Ms. Markovich. For the record, Ms. Markovich, can you just give me your reasons for
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think for me, it was really around the sort of minorness of the application. I had some questions around that, particularly in light of lack of evidence from neighbors, especially around impact. So those were my primary reasons.
All right, thank you. My reasons are actually surrounding the appropriate use of the land. And so for me, it's not that I don't think it's necessarily appropriate, but I don't think that I've had enough evidence before me to determine that in fact it is orderly development in that sense. So is it appropriate? So if I'd had more information with regards to how this was going to work, then I think I would have been more prone to support it. But I think in fact, some of this information would have been very useful to come forward. And I think absent having some of this before us, at least for me, I didn't see it as being sufficient evidence of the appropriateness of the use. So that's the test that I think fails for me. So that's it for the record. That's why we do this, is to make sure that it is spoken into the record and will be reflected as part of the decision. All right, that's it. You're good to go, I think, at this
Great.
point.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thanks so much. All right, we're going to go to application number 6 next. And I'm looking for Mr. I think it's Mr. Todat, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it's for 1994 St. Joseph Boulevard. All right, do coordinators, oh yes, I see that, Mr. Tino Tolet.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Sure.
Good evening. All right, so I will need to read to you before we hear your application. So do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided to you as part of the application process and by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies, that it was there for the prerequisite number of days prior to the hearing, and that it was clearly visible and legible for all of the time that it was posted? Do I either affirm or swear that to be true?
Confirm.
You affirm?
Confirm, yes.
There's an affirmation or swearing.
Swearing, Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so with that, there's no changes to your notice that's required. We don't need a presentation from you on this evening. Some committee members, I'm giving you the option to go directly to questions on this. Any questions on the application? I'm not seeing any. All right. I have a couple. So can you tell me a little bit about where you're at with regards to the site plan process?
We're at the final stages. The only thing we could have designed the site without going to committee of adjustment, but the planners felt it was better to get the larger parking stalls closer to the entrance, and we're only waiting for the committee of adjustment.
All right, so it has gone through technical circulation. You've gone through red line revisions on the site plan. So you're really only looking for this in order to get to an approval?
Correct.
On the site plan. All right. So I'm looking for the planner on this file. I believe it was, let me just see the signature.
It was Shuma Murshid, I believe.
That's not the name I have. So I'm looking for, just a minute, bear with me for a second. All right, so it's Ms. Scleroso. Probably
Hi. Hi.
Sorry, I'm sure I didn't
okay.
pronounce that correctly, but okay. So I just wanted to know just to confirm that you've talked with the site planner on this. You're comfortable that we're far enough along in the process to be considering this application?
So I'm not actually the planner in charge of the site plan application. That's Shoma Murshid. And I just want to correct the applicant. The direction from Shoma was not that she was recommending the variance or that she said that was the best way to go. She just said that that the 1.5 meter landscape buffer was required, and that if they wanted to proceed with the site plan that they submitted, like the most recent one, that they would require variances.
But Ms. Clarezo, have you had a chance to speak with the site planner to find out where they're at? And are you okay? And are you comfortable that they're far enough along in the process for us to be dealing with a minor variance application?
From what I understand from Shoma, the applicant has submitted 4 different versions of the site plan, and this current version was the one that she had the least concerns with regarding the turning radius and the functionality of the parking lot. And location of the compact spaces, location of the accessible parking spaces, accessibility through the walkway.
All right, just wanted to make sure that we understood where we're at in that process, because it should be, before we deal with our minor variance applications, that process should be further along. In order, we should be following on to enable that one rather than the opposite. Okay, so nobody has any other questions, because at this point I can just open it up to the public. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak either for or against this minor variance application on St. Joseph Boulevard? All right, nobody registered to speak, and I'm not seeing any hands come forward. All right, so members of the committee, all those in favor of the minor variance? All right, okay, for the record, the minor variance application is granted unanimously, and I think that's all on this application. So thank you, Mr. Tinto.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I thought it was Tinto. Tola. Is it Tola? Did I get that right? Sorry?
Tino Talat.
Talat. Thank you for that pronunciation. I think I've seen your name before, but I wasn't sure how to pronounce it. So thank you very much, and good luck with the project.
Thank you very much.
Okay. We're now off to application number 7 and 8. Mr. Bates. That was prompt. That was really prompt, Mr. Bates. So, all right. So I do need to read to you. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided to you as part of the application process and by the committee was posted first at the property to which the application applies, that it was there for the prescribed number of days prior to the hearing, and that it was clearly visible and legible for the entirety of that time? Do you either swear or affirm that to be true?
I do affirm, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you very much. Couple of housekeeping items on your notice. Are you aware?
We reviewed the recommendation from city staff or the observations. We have no concerns with those changes.
I do need to read them into the record, however. So let me just go through them and then you can just confirm them. So in the purpose of the application, we're striking. However, the application was not completed within the statutory timeline. So we are striking that. And we're adding a new sentence. It says the properties merge entitled when 130 Dagmar Avenue, shown on part 1 and 2 of 4R 29, 599, and 188 Baribeau Street, shown on part 3 of on 4R 29, 599, came under single ownership in 2021. Correct? No issues with that? And then the second housekeeping amendment I have relates to both parts 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, where we're striking the reference to a detached duplex dwelling and replacing it with triplex in both cases.
That's correct.
Perfect. All right, so we have done that. And I think that's it. So we're not requiring a presentation from you, Mr. Bays, this evening. We will need just questions from the committee. Any questions? No, it looks awfully quiet. Okay, well, in that case, I'm going to go straight to the public portion. We do have a speaker on your application this evening, and that would be Ms. Serene Zaba, and I believe we already have you with us. So good evening.
Hi, good evening. I'm Eric Bay's colleague.
Oh, you're not
just writing on the
okay.
application as well, not a speaker on the application, Madam Chair.
Not a resident. Okay, so I thought maybe that was it. All right. So if you're with Stantec, that's terrific. All right, then I don't have any speakers from the public. So is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak either for or against this application? We actually have two parts to this application. We have a consent and a minor variance on Baribeau Street and Dagmar. Anyone want to come forward with comments to the committee? Not seeing anybody come forward, so that's good. Next item of business then is the conditions of approval, Mr. Bays. Any issues? I only have one.
There's only one, and I think that's pretty standard for a situation like this, just because of the location of that property line between abutting building. Sorry.
All right. Okay, and there's no questions? I'm surprised because we had some discussion about this. Ms. Willis, go ahead.
Not that anything turns on it, but there are two things really. One is whether or not this is exactly the same as the configuration that existed prior to the merging of the titles of the two properties. And secondly, because I'm curious, the fact that you did have separate lots, they then merged, did that in any way cause loss of non-conforming rights? I'm just wondering whether strictly you do need the variances or not, whether or not they would survive this new, it's the same old configuration, but did you lose the I guess the benefit of the variances by virtue of losing the severance line?
Serene, did you want to take a try at that one?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Darn. This was a question that we raised with staff actually through the process, because this was one of our points, particularly that there was also a change in the zoning since the previous construction. At this point in time, the interpretation was that the vast majority of the variances that were approved by the board in 2017 were associated with setbacks from the property lines. So since the approval, the building has actually been constructed. So therefore it enjoys legal non-conforming rights under the previous board approval, as well as the previous zoning that was in force at the time. So at this point, we're really only looking at variances with respect to creation or recreation of the lots as they stand right now under the new R4 zone. So that's why we're only pursuing these two particular variances.
Okay, good. Thank you.
All right, then I think we can go to vote. Did I make a call out for the audience yet? For public input, I did, didn't I? No,
Yeah.
I did, thank you. Remind me, it's getting late. Just kind of getting at that point. Okay, so on the consent applications, all those in favor? All right, for the record, the consent application is unanimously granted. And on the minor variance application, all those in favor? All right, for the record, the application is granted unanimously. And I think that's it.
Perfect. Thank you, Madam Chair. Have a good evening, everyone.
I think we're just going to go to applications 9 and 10 at this point. So 41 Rebecca. And we've got Mr. Poulton, and I believe Mr. Chown, you're also identified as a speaker.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Poulton.
Good evening.
And is Mr. Chown joining you? I think so, right? All right. In the meantime, who's doing the declaration for me tonight? Mr. Poulton?
It actually will be the owner of the property, Paul McElliott. He should be on the Zoom call, and he was going to take the oath for posting the sign.
All right. Do we have Mr. McElliott?
Or Laura McElliott, either Paul or Laura.
All right. So either one.
I believe Laura is muted. There we go.
Good evening. I think we got both. So I'm going to read this, and you can choose who wants to respond. So, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided to you as part of the application process and by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies, that it was there for the prescribed number of days prior to the hearing, and that it was clearly visible and legible for the entirety of that time? Do you either swear or affirm that to be true? Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Affirm.
You affirm? Okay. All right, thank you. With that, then, Mr. Poulton, we are looking for a presentation on this. And so, and the other thing, and I see Mr. Chown can come back, because when we adjourned the last time, it was about the question as to whether or not we had captured the variances required accurately. Because you'll recall that there was sort of a two-part to the provision in the zoning bylaw, and we wanted to make sure that that we were in fact dealing with everything that we needed to deal at. And I saw that there wasn't actually any change, so I'm going to assume that in fact you did that analysis and you came to that conclusion. So as part of your presentation, if you could also address that. So we're going to give you the floor.
Okay. I did watch the previous hearing on YouTube, so I am up to date in terms of what the question was in terms of the wording of the variance and the wording in the zoning bylaw. So I will speak to that.
And one last thing, Mr. Poulton, if you could also talk about the consultation that you undertook since the meeting that we adjourned. Okay, so since I can't remember. Yes. All right. So with that, go ahead, please.
Okay, so I'm Brian Poulton. I'm a planner at Novatech, and Novatech acted as an agent on behalf of the owners to prepare and file the severance and minor variance applications at 41 Rebecca Crescent. So prepared a presentation today. It'll include a discussion on the existing conditions of the property. It'll clarify the zoning bylaw provisions and what we're seeking variances for, because we got a lot of comments for the previous adjournment about lot width, lot area, and we want to clarify that. I'll then present the severances and minor variances and provide a planning rationale, and then also speak to the figures we provided in support of the application. At this point, I'll also say, following the adjournment, we set up a meeting with the community association, the Rockwell Heights Landowners Association. That was attended, and a similar presentation was provided as well. And we did a question and answer period. And through that process, we also realized the variances there are lists of criteria that in support of the proposed severances, and it's listed in 2 different locations in the zoning bylaw. And so we realized we needed to recirculate and request the variance for, it's the same variance, but to both references in the zoning bylaw. And you'll see that in my presentation. So proceeding to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is a zoomed out air photo of the property. As you can see, it's a corner lot in Rothwell Heights. And generally speaking, you can see the eclectic lot fabric in this subdivision. It's characteristic of a 1960s subdivision. The subdivision to the east, you can see it's more uniform. It's developed in the 70s and 80s. So this property is just south of the Ottawa River, and we're just east of Blair Road. Next slide, please. So this is a zoomed, I'm sorry, the clarity on all these slides aren't that great. I'm not sure what happened, but this is a zoomed in air photo showing the lot fabric. You can see the subject property, and it's a corner lot. It's got frontage along Cumbermere Lane, as well as along Rebecca Crescent. And the property to the south, you can see it's a park, it's Cumbermere Park. So that's the immediate context. Next slide, please. So this slide is the survey plan submitted with the applications. It shows the existing conditions of the property, including the lot lines, all of the trees on the property, the existing dwelling, and the existing driveway. So that's the existing conditions of the property. And you can see there's a lot of different trees scattered throughout the property, mostly along Cumbermere Lane, as well as along different property lines. And then there's a line of trees along Rebecca Crescent. Next slide, please. So this is now, I'm going to clarify the zoning performance standards and how they apply to the proposed severances. So this is a zoning map of the property, and you can see it's zone R1AA, that's residential first density, subzone AA. And you can see all of the properties in the area that are residential are in the same R1AA zone. So the provisions we'll be talking about apply to all corner lots in this area. Next slide, please. So this is Schedule A of, this is Schedule 342 of the zoning bylaw, and it identifies an area, Area A, and you can see the subject properties highlighted. We're within Area A of Schedule 342. This is important for the following slides. Next slide, please. This slide shows Table 156A of the zoning bylaw, and it shows the performance standards for the subzone, the AA subzone for the property. And you can see the minimum lot width is 30 meters, and the minimum lot area is 1,390 square meters, subject to end note 3. The text of end note 3, someone has turned off the lights on me. Oh, well, I think you can still see me, so I'm going to continue. So end note 3, it says on a corner lot in Schedule 342, which is the subject property, except in Area A of Schedule 344, that doesn't apply to the site, where both water and wastewater municipal services are present, they're present for the site. A minimum lot area of no less than 49% of the required minimum lot area of the subzone may be applied if. Then it lists 3 different criteria. So that minimum lot area, 49%, would be 681.1 square meters. So that is the minimum lot area for a corner lot if it's severed under these criteria in end note 3. The first criteria is to severance granted by the Committee of Adjustment. That's why we're here. Second criteria is only one detached dwelling is built on each of the proposed lots. That is the proposal, to sever the lot to build 2 detached dwellings. And then the third criteria is each of the dwellings have their front wall and driveway facing frontage on different streets, whether or not that frontage is the front lot line. That is the provision we're varying. It's referenced again later on in the zoning bylaw. And the exact wording that was in dispute was front wall and its technical definition in the zoning bylaw. And by definition, the front wall of a dwelling is the face of a dwelling that faces the front lot line. So even though there's a reference that says whether or not that frontage is the front lot line, it doesn't matter. Based on the definitions in the zoning bylaw, the front wall of the dwelling will face Rebecca Crescent, and therefore the minor variance has been reworded to request relief from the front wall and driveway to face Rebecca Crescent. And you'll see that later on in my minor variance sketch. End note 3 also references section 5 of the zoning bylaw, section 144. So next slide, please. So this is section 144 of the zoning bylaw, and you can see provision 4 for detached dwellings on rear yards or on corner lots. It actually lists the same criteria we've been just discussing, except it's a little bit more specific. It limits it to different R1 zones. It doesn't apply to all R1 zones. But otherwise, exactly the same text. And so through adjourning the application, we realized we needed to request the same variance twice using different policy references just to make sure we had our bases covered. So that is what has happened. So we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, now we're into the consent sketches. So this is one of the consent sketches to sever the new corner lot. And what I would like to point out is the lot width as measured in the zoning bylaw. It's 30.19 meters for the corner lot, and it has a lot area of 1,300 square meters. It's rounded to the nearest 100, but they both been rounded down. Next slide, please. So this is the other sketch we provided. It severs the interior lot. And again, it's got a lot frontage as defined in the zoning bylaw of, lot width of 31.55 meters and an area of about 1,000 square meters. So these lot widths are in excess of 30 required under the zoning bylaw. And the areas are far in excess of the 381.1 square meters. That's the minimum as per severing this corner lot. I would like to just speak to the tests for consent quickly now. I don't have slides for them, but just quickly, in terms of the PPS, we are within a settlement area, the city of Ottawa and the urban area. And the policies of, we have lost my presentation. I was going to leave the sketches up while I was presenting the planning rationale part. Thank you very much, because I've got a few slides after these as well. And I am trying to go quickly. I appreciate the time here. So the policies of the PPS speak to the efficient use of land and efficient use of infrastructure and community resources in the area. So the proposed severances would efficiently use the land, severing it to build 2 new detached dwellings where 1 currently exists. And again, there's amenities within the community to serve this proposed severed lot, including the park immediately to the south. The PPS also speaks to housing policies and the need to provide housing to meet market-based needs. And so the proposed severances are consistent with the policies of the PPS. In terms of the Planning Act, a plan of subdivision is not required for these severances to sever the corner lot. As well, there's the criteria in section 53, subsection 12 of the Planning Act, where they list a whole bunch of criteria for consent applications. I speak to those criteria in the covering letter to the Committee of Adjustment, and I don't want to repeat 12 different paragraphs reading directly from the letter, but I would just speak to criteria C, which has to do with a conformity to the official plan. So there's 2 official plans. There's the one that's in effect from 2003, and then there's also the new one adopted by council that's not approved by the province, the 2021 official plan. Both of these official plans speak to infill and intensification in the general urban area and in neighborhood designation, respectfully. And they encourage development on corner lots. They encourage intensification. They also encourage retention of trees and preservation of the tree canopy. And so in terms of the consent applications, I will detail this further on in my discussion, but they meet the, they conform to the policies of the official plan. Because that's the big criteria. I wanted to just speak to that one specifically. Next slide, please. So this is the minor variance sketch. And hey, I sent this at 4, an updated presentation. That's good to see. I had the previous version of this sketch in the presentation though. So I see both variances we're requesting are listed. The wording has changed slightly. It says to permit the front wall and driveway of a detached dwelling to face Rebecca Crescent. And then it says, whereas on a corner lot in the R1 zone within Schedule 342, it just repeats the zoning bylaw standards. And the only difference is the policy references. And so that only applies to the corner lot, minor variance, and that's to provide a driveway and the detached dwelling face Rebecca Crescent, as opposed to having to clear trees and provide a driveway off of Cumbermere Lane. In terms of the 4 tests for minor variance, again, Both official plans speak to preservation of trees and green space and the tree canopy. Our minor variance is it's not necessary in support of the severances. We could have filed it without the minor variance, but city staff specifically asked us to file a minor variance application for the driveway to be off of Rebecca Crescent. We've never been asked to file a minor variance application before from city staff. So that was quite impressive. And that's just preserve the trees. There's a lot of trees along Cumbermere Lane. So that it meets the intent and purpose of the official plan. In terms of the zoning bylaw, the property is zoned for detached dwellings. Detached dwellings are permitted use, as well as in terms of compatible development. Again, the minor variance is to save trees along Cumbermere Avenue in keeping with the character of mature trees in the neighborhood. And so it meets the intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw. Is it desirable for the use of the land? It's the same rationale. We're just preserving trees along Cumbermere Lane. And so it also supports intensification on the lot, which is a goal of both official plans. So it's desirable for the use of the land. And then the last test, is it minor? Again, it speaks to impacts. In this case, this minor variance removes the impact that would be required if we had to provide a driveway off Cumbermere. So it actually eliminates any impact from the severance if we didn't provide the minor variance. So it is minor in nature. So that's the planning rationale side. And I've got 6 more slides and I'll talk to them quickly. Next slide, please. So this is the figure in the tree information report. It's a very useful figure. It provides a lot of information. It identifies all of the trees on the property. It categorizes them color-coded based on if they're on adjacent properties, which is the blue, if they're city-owned or partially city-owned, which is yellow, and then if they're privately owned. It also then categorizes them A, B, or C, depending on high priority, medium priority, or low priority for preservation. 2 trees I want to point out are trees 6 and tree 1, which is both along Rebecca Crescent. The conditions in the staff report speak to those 2 trees specifically for preservation. You can see they're high priority trees, but you can see that all the trees that would have to be removed if driveway was required off of Cumbermere Lane. And again, the owners had no obligation to file a minor variance application. It just made a lot of sense, given that there's an existing driveway off of Rebecca Crescent, to file that minor variance application. Next slide, please. Okay, so I've got this slide and the next slide are building envelope figures. So this building envelope figure is the property as it exists today without severing it, what the permitted building envelope is, taking into account the required yards. And you can see the buildable area is 1,630 square meters. It's large and contiguous, and it would remove a lot of the privately owned trees on the site. That's what could be removed as of right through just the building permit application. Next slide, please. So this figure shows the buildable areas and the required yards based on if the lots were severed. And you can see if you total the 2 building areas, it's much less. It's about 1,300 square meters, not 1,600. New rear yards required for the interior yard, and the lot line that is proposed creates 2 interior yards. All of this adds to land on the property where trees would be protected as of right under the city's zoning bylaw and tree cut bylaw. So the proposed severance actually acts to protect more land on the site and protect more trees now and future trees through the severance application. There's been a lot of comments on the character of the community with regard to lot width and regard to mature trees. I just again want to point out the lot widths of the proposed lots: 31.5 for the interior, 30.19 for the corner lot. Can I go to the next slide, please? So this is an air photo of the neighborhood of the block between Kindle Court and Massey Lane for Rebecca Crescent. This air photo is from 2007. There's a couple purposes for that, but one is I'd like to point out the property across the street, across Rebecca Crescent, was developed at that time. And you can see it was developed with a house from the interior lot line to the interior lot line, and the property was by and large clear cut to do this. And so this is what could happen on 41 Rebecca without severing the lot. This is approximately what we permitted as of right, just through a building permit process. The severance application here provides an opportunity to city staff to request conditions to protect trees. It also results in more land being protected, existing existing trees on the site through the severance application. The other thing I want to point out on this is the two corner lots on the west side of Rebecca Crescent. We've labeled the lot widths, and again, this is as per Geo Ottawa, so it's plus or minus, but the corner lot to the south on Kindle Court is 30.5 meters lot width. That is narrower than the interior lot we're proposing, and it's 1 foot wider than the corner lot we're proposing. It's 102 feet as opposed to 101 feet. The property to the north, there's a lot line through it, but we've included it all for technical reasons. It has a lot width of 23.2 meters, which is by and far lower than the performance standards in the zone of 30 meters. So in terms of the character of residential development along Rebecca Crescent, the proposed severances meet the character, and in fact, they're fully conforming lots in terms of the zoning bylaw and performance standards, and it's within character of the community. I'd like to go to the next slide, please. Okay, so this is the second last slide I have, and this is a preliminary site plan for the corner lot that was prepared. Obviously, it's not the final plan, and it's an excerpt from it, but it shows that the corner lot can be developed with a detached dwelling with a driveway while retaining the trees along Cumbermere Lane. There is, you can see near where the proposed lot line is along Rebecca Crescent, that tree, that is tree number 6 that the city's interested in protecting. Now this driveway, we received last minute a revised concept site plan, and it shows the driveway further south along Rebecca. And I want to mention that here, there wasn't enough time to update the slide deck, but it is possible to provide a driveway off of Rebecca Crescent and develop this property for residential uses. And then about one more slide. So this slide, we asked city staff to provide us with examples where the criteria in EndNote 3, as well as in section 144, were applied to approve severances of corner lots in the urban area within the Greenbelt. And within an hour, they sent us back this list of 10 different applications where corner lots have been severed using these criteria in the past since January 2018. I don't know if this is an extensive list or not. It's just what we received back. So these criteria and EndNote 3 have been used to sever lots. They have for the last 4.5 years. They're not new, and they allow for severing corner lots, which have been identified as prime candidates for intensification. And this is the most gentlest form of intensification, replacing one detached dwelling with 2 detached dwellings. We're not rezoning the property to permit a new use. So that is my presentation. The last slide is a thank you slide. Thank you very much.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Fulton. That was actually a very fulsome presentation, which is, I think, really important given the amount of interest in this application. So thank you for doing that. The only portion that I didn't hear you give us a lot of information about is your discussions with the residents since the last application. So can you tell me what activities have taken place?
So we've been coordinating with Jane Brammer with the Community Association, some back and forth, and we coordinated setting up a community meeting. We had this over Zoom. This was about a week and a half ago. It was attended by members of the community. It was a good discussion back and forth. I gave the same presentation, minor modifications. I didn't have as much of the planning rationale, but gave the same presentation and answered questions for a good hour and a half. It was a good dialogue and discussion. We provided the slides to the community as well. Apart from that, that was the back and forth that we've had at Novatech. I can't speak to if the owners approached neighbors or not. We always advise the owners reach out to adjacent neighbors, have discussions, let them know what's going on. But that is the community engagement we've had since the applications were adjourned.
All right, thank you, Mr. Polton. Thank you also for just confirming that. In fact, I don't know how I missed it, but I guess you have made the change to the to this, you know, and essentially identified the right provisions of the zoning bylaw. So we have what we need to deal with the application now. So that's terrific. Okay, so what we're going to do next is we're going to give the members of the committee a chance to ask questions. And we're going to get some clarification, and there may or may not be any, I don't know. And then after that, we will go to the public portion of the hearing. So, committee members, have you got any questions for Mr. Polton about whether it's the trees or it's about anything? No? This is one that we've had a really close look at, so this doesn't surprise me all that much. We had a lot of discussion about this application in the pre-meet. So, okay, so with that then, I will go to a speakers list that I have for this application. And so the first name I have is Ms. Clermont. So I just need to know if you're in fact the spokesperson for the group. Ms. Clermont, can you confirm that for me? Oh, you're on mute, sorry.
Am I good now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
I'll take that role, sure.
All right, so, okay, with that then, go ahead. We're gonna take good notes and then we'll go to the next speaker and go from there.
Yes, I do have something that I would like to read, but there are 3 things from Mr. Polton's presentation that stood out as incorrect that I would like to have corrected. I don't know if I do that before or after.
All right, so Ms. Clermont, do you need this presentation up? Have you requested this to be up on screen?
I have 3 slides that I might refer to after the little statement that I would like to read. So I can do that before or come back to the statements that Mr. Polton has, certain numbers and certain things that he has said, whatever the committee prefers.
So the first thing I want to know is this your presentation? Because it looks like Mr. Polton's.
This is part of mine as well, but we can deal with this after.
All
so
right.
I would just like to read through what I have to say and then go through the slides and then correct certain things that were said that I believe to be incorrect, if that's fair. Thank you.
So I'm going to give you some extra time because I think you are taking on that role. So I'm going to give you a little bit of extra time. So walk us through it.
Thank you kindly. I'll just read through, just make things very simple. Madam Chair and committee members, good evening. At the core of this hearing, I believe, is the interpretation on the use of the corner lot provision and how it was meant to be applied across the city. Assumption can't be that consent to sever is automatically accepted without taking a very critical look at all the mitigating factors. If it were, it would render this process unnecessary. As per Lucy Ramirez's report dated June 30th, corner lot provisions permit severance on parcels on certain corner lots. Each lot is required to be no less than 49% of the minimum lot area for the subzone, but must maintain the required minimum lot width. The bylaw reads very clearly that provision 3 may be applied if permission to sever the lot into 2 lots is granted by the Committee of Adjustment, which is why we're here this evening. It is my belief that the full frontage on Rebecca itself does not meet the frontage as per the survey or as per what MPAC calls lot frontage. If the provision were applied as intended with the driveway on Combermere, then the lot would not have the required frontage to apply for severance. Even if Combermere Lane did have the proper frontage, priority as per the official plan is to protect the trees. All city-owned trees can be preserved if the parcel remains intact. All private-owned trees lining Combermere and all the high-priority A trees can be preserved if 1 dwelling is built rather than 2. The existing known driveway access would not require a corner side triangle by retaining the parcel as is. Pardon me. The corner lot severances that have been granted, the examples provided by the applicants in his presentation, and it's on my slide 3 actually, Mandy, are far more in line with the intended infill 2 corner lot provision. Thank you. Every example they chose to provide were properties located near major corridors or transit opportunities and/or were on busy roadways, some with traffic lights, sidewalks, and streetlights. None were of similar location or overall environmental or natural feel as this neighborhood. There remain many questions with regards to this application and the process. On Ms. Ramirez's synopsis of application dated June 30th, she mentions, the owner has submitted revised material. We have not been apprised of anything new. The site plan dated March 30th, Mandy, slide 2, please, was submitted showing both the front wall and the driveway facing Rebecca Crescent. Why was the hearing adjourned, saying that information was not known? The applicant has not spoken to any neighbors, missed opportunity to have a meaningful dialogue. The site plan showing the proposed house shows a notched, Mandy, slide 1. The site plan showing the proposed house shows a notched driveway around the critical root zone. It is not in line with the tree report. That would be tree number 6, the critical root zone shown in the dotted lines around the tree. Both the consent and minor variance applications state, and that's the application submitted by for minor variance and consent, that the application will facilitate the development of 2 new detached dwellings on the property. Trees may be required to be removed through the building permit process. Nothing further is specified. The application makes no mention about the property being serviced by septic. Is that relevant? As per my written reports dated May 16th and July 4th, this consent application minor variance do not meet the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw or provincial policy statement and the official plan. To elaborate briefly, the parcel sits at an elevation differential of 44 meters from the nearest major corridor. The walk up Blair Road isn't for the faint of heart. It is a 28-minute walk uphill. We have no sidewalks. We can make which makes pedestrian access to transit a challenge, most particularly in the winter. And there are no streetlights in the neighborhood. In short, we are not what the city would consider a 15-minute neighborhood. There is 0 transit service in our neighborhood on evenings or weekends. The closest stop is 1.1 kilometers away. When we speak of intensification, and I can list about 15 lots that have been severed in Rothwell Heights in the last several years, I think our area is intensifying at the policy's target, extremely gradual. Our neighborhood is not growth or construction averse. In fact, we welcome the applicant's quality construction as evidenced by his project at Kmart 2 streets away on a large secluded lot to be repeated here on the intact parcel. The creation of 1 additional lot in this manner does not meaningfully align with the city's intensification goals. It does nothing to address affordable housing. It is not situated near transit-intensive corridors or major roadways or transitways. Further, tree protection cannot realistically be achieved when construction machinery will require access on 2 separate parcels at 2 separate times. To think differently would be a mistake. The neighborhood, as exemplified by the 135 signature petition, is clear that this type of substantial change is unwelcome in this area. Applying a policy that would allow a 49% reduction on the corner lots in a neighborhood where one of the primary characteristics is winding roads and non-linear streets would invite more and more of this corner lot provision on the basis that the precedent has been applied in this neighborhood and can now be permitted at large. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Claremont. All right, so I'm gonna make one clarification on one comment that you made, just so that everybody is aware. So it may be that the site plan during the last go around did show the wall and the driveway facing onto Rebecca. What we were discussing is whether or not that situation had been properly identified as a variance requirement in the zoning bylaw. So even though they knew it, it was whether, so they looked at the wall and the driveway and they thought we just need to worry about the driveway, but the reality was the wall as well, or maybe I've got that reversed, but we had to actually make sure that there was reference to the 2 parts. So So it's not that they didn't know that it was going to look that way. We just needed to know that the minor variance was going to deal with that accurately. So, and they've made that correction. So that's good for tonight. So that's what we wanted. Okay, that's the only clarification I wanted to make. Otherwise, questions from the committee for Ms. Claremont? Ms. Willis.
Ms. Claremont, thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to make sure that I understand the intent of your, or the sort of the quantum of your concern about the variance, because it's been made very clear that the committee would not have this before them. It would simply be a severance application, because as of right, they can do a lot, they can do the severances, the lot frontages, the front lot areas all work. The only thing that we are considering here, and that requires evidence that it is in compliance with the 4 tests of the Planning Act, is the flipping of the rotating of the unit by 90 degrees. That's all that is being varied here. It's nothing to do with intensification, with tree canopy, with property values, with any of those things. And in fact, we understand from the applicant is they were fully prepared to come in with just a severance, but in keeping with the city policy on tree retention, it made more sense to just rotate the whole unit 90 degrees. So I just wanted to make sure that that's your understanding of this as well, and that your objection to this is simply the objection to the flipping of the rotating of the unit by 90 degrees to take access off Rebecca rather than off Cumbermere.
Actually, not at all. It references in particular, we can't speak to the minor variance before dealing with the consent. The consent is not a given right. It's not a fait accompli without having that discussion. A blanket policy without that discussion would render the committee, we would not need this process if that would just be granted without that discussion. Now, corner lot provisions is a relatively new concept. The examples that were given where it was granted and where the city wants these provisions granted is where there are more bus services, where use of transit way is available, where there's pedestrian access, where all of these things fall in line with provincial and municipal policies, which it doesn't here. So we can't be speaking to the minor variance until we actually deal with the consent issue. And that's the issue we have to answer to first. That subsection, and actually that's one of what Mr. Poulton had highlighted, conveniently passed over section I, which reads, the Committee of Adjustment has to approve the corner lot provision before we can talk to any other aspects of an application. It's very clearly, it says it may be applied if it is approved by the Committee of Adjustment, which is why we're here now. It hasn't been approved by you yet, which is why we're here. We don't want it to be approved. The wording does say may be approved if the Committee of Adjustment approves it. And so here we are.
Well, thank you for that. I think that's really the basis of what I'm saying, is that the issue that we're looking at is the variance to the bylaw, which is simply the flipping of the unit. The zoning bylaw, if the city was intent on making it only certain areas of this particular zone in the city, they would have imposed that zone. So we're stuck with the zone the way it says what it does. And it's my view that we should be focusing only on the 90-degree rotation of the unit on the street as a means to preserve trees. But thank you for your explanation.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions for Ms. Claremont? Mr. Hindle, go ahead, please.
I just had a question. I know Ms. Claremont raised the idea that these properties are serviced by septic. Is that the case, or is the intention that any new builds will be connected to water, wastewater from the city?
I'm sorry, is that for me or the planner?
I think we can hand it to Mr. Polton.
So there are water and sewers, like there's full services in Rebecca Crescent for the property to connect to. So the proposed detached dwellings will have full city services. It won't be on a separate.
Okay, so we don't have that concern there.
It's one of the criteria for the severances. So we would have had to have requested relief otherwise. So
Yes, exactly. That's why I just wanted to double check, but that's good. Okay, no, and I think, we'll still have to address the idea of desirability of the consent, but I think and then minor variance, obviously, but yeah, we'll go with that as we hear more comments. Thank you.
I just want to make one comment. So, Ms. Clermont, you're bringing forward a lot of good arguments in terms of the responsibility of the committee to make the decision. And that is what the Planning Act then provides us with, the 4 tests that says, do you think it's in keeping with? So what we'll do, we'll hear from everybody, but we'll try and keep those 4 tests in mind as part of our decision. One way or the other, so that we can at least address those, and that you'll see that part A, that our what's in our right before us in our jurisdiction to make that decision. What is it that we've determined as part of the discussions on the 4 tests? So that I think will be helpful for you. All right, so I do have a next speaker then, Mr. Bateman. Do we have Mr. Bateman?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You're not on camera, however.
Okay, well, I don't know. But if you can hear me, that's the more relevant.
That's fine. It is fine. It's nice to see our speakers, but
Yeah,
if you can't.
It says something about go to settings, and I don't know if that'll screw things up. So if we can just start. First of all, just so you know, I live on the northeast corner of Massey Lane and Rebecca. So my backyard backs onto the subject property. And to answer your question, nobody came to talk to us about the proposed development, be it the McGilligut's, Polton, anybody. So to put that out, there has been no discussion with the local residents, as subject to what they may say. Secondly, I agree with Ms. Claremont that the issue of severance, as far as I'm aware, hasn't been dealt with. And I don't understand how you can deal with a minor variance when the issue of severance hasn't even been addressed. I do agree with Mr. Polton that we should save the trees. And there is one driveway for that property. And it should remain as one driveway for the full property. For he's addressed a minor variance to have the one property, as somebody said, turn 90 degrees. The issue is there are trees all along Rebecca. So therefore, to save those trees, there cannot be a driveway into that property. So they're talking about saving trees on Combermere, but they fail to recognize that they've got to save the trees on Rebecca. And they need to take those down to provide access to a driveway to put another dwelling. With respect to, and I'm not sure what 4 property characteristics you said for, severing a property, but the purpose of the zone is to maintain or enhance the neighborhood. And severing this property into 2 lots does not detract from the neighborhood. I mean, I grew up here in the 80s with my parents as a teenager. I met my wife on our street when she was a teenager. We came back here, raised our kids in this community because of what it offered. Large lots, big, mature trees, a serene setting. As Ms. Claremont mentioned, having somebody come in and put one dwelling on it, yes, we expect that. To subdivide it and put houses on smaller lots, lot sizes, that's not what this neighborhood is, never has been, and never should be. Once you start going down that path of severing and making lot sizes smaller, you can't go back. There are essentially two communities within the city, being Rockcliffe and Rothwell, that offers such an area for people to, live in that type of setting. It's important that we retain that. And, my view is until you've got a decision on severance, there is no issue with respect to the minor variance, because there is one driveway and there should only be one driveway. And by doing that, there is an existing driveway there now, and it would retain all the trees, which is, if you listen to Ross Poulton, that was very important. That's what they're trying to do. So if they really mean what they're saying, that's what they would do, is build one house, keep the driveway the way it is, and retain all the trees. As Ms. Claremont said, which Mr. Poulton tried to avoid, is even meeting those conditions. The wording is the committee may do it. It doesn't say the committee shall do it.
No, but Mr. Bateman, that's exactly what I was talking about, right? Our job is to apply the 4 tests under the Planning Act, and we will do that. In rendering a decision, that's our guidelines.
Well, reading the purpose of the zone, it says to maintain or enhance. And I would love to hear how severing this property can maintain or enhance. I think there are a number of people who in the area signed a petition. We knocked on doors, and pretty much everybody that answered the door signed the petition. They said how much they love living in the area for what it gave. The large lot sizes, the mature trees, we don't have street lights. It's very quiet. And that's important to the people that live here. Not to go in, sever it, and try and make a quick buck.
All right. Is there any other comments, Mr. Bateman?
No, that's it. Thank you.
All right. Committee members, any questions for Mr. Bateman? All right. We're going to go to our third speaker, Mr. Barry. I see you're here as well. So did you want to come forward? And Mr. Barry, did you want to speak in French or in English?
Good evening, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the committees, my submissions will be very brief. I am a longtime resident of Rothwell Heights, and I've raised my family here as well. This is a fairly unique neighborhood. You've heard the other speakers address the characteristics of the neighborhood in terms of the large lots, the heavy tree canopy, the fact that we don't have sidewalks, the fact that we don't have lights. This is not a neighborhood that lends itself to intensification particularly. That being said, it is not a neighborhood that is adverse to renewal. Ms. Claremont alluded to that in her submissions. By my drive around count of this evening, there's at least 9 brand new homes that are in construction right now in Rothwell Heights. That doesn't take into account the homes that are being subjected to extensive renovations. So this is not an issue of trying to stop time or stop progress. This is about having the right type of development that fits into the neighborhood. To the extent that the committee has any jurisdiction, wherever you find it, whether it's residual or whether it's whole, in terms of considering the application. And if you have any discretion with respect to the consent application, then I would urge this committee and its members to take a holistic view of the consent application and the variance. Looking at them independently rather than in conjunction, I think sort of defeats the purpose of the act. One doesn't make sense with the other, without the other. And so I would urge this committee, having heard the submissions from the resident, to take a hard look at whether in fact the consent should be granted. And I think that's a threshold decision that you need to do. If you do decide to do it, then I think tree preservation does become very important, and you'll have to guide your decision on that. But I would urge you to very carefully think about whether in fact you are obligated to agree to this consent application, and then whether you have any discretion to impose some conditions to it, or to put some narrower parameters to it. And if you do, then I would urge you to do that. In terms of the petition, pretty rare to get any 5 Rothwell Heights residents to agree to any single thing. To get 135 of them to agree to a petition is quite remarkable. I also would like, and Ms. Claremont can, or Mr. Bateman can clarify this for me, but my understanding is that the petition was circulated after the information meeting that Mr. Poulton put on for the residents. And I think that's of significance as well, because you've heard the complaint that there was very little community consultation, and to the extent there was a Zoom conference, I suspect that most of the signatures on that petition are after that happened. So I bring that to the committee's attention simply to underscore the volume of upset, and not upset, concern, genuine concern from people who love this neighborhood as to what this particular severance means. This is not a straightforward corner lot. This is a corner lot on Combamere Park. Combamere Park is at the heart of Rothwell Heights. That's where the baseball diamond is. That's where the ice rink is in the winter. That's where the tennis courts are. This is a bit of a showcase lot, and to go ahead and to divide that lot, I think does give rise to floodgates or slippery slope, or however you want to characterize it. And I think that's what has the neighborhood residents very much concerned. Subject to your questions, those are my comments.
All right. So thank you very much. And I am familiar with the area. I actually lived probably for 30 years within about a 10-minute walk from the subject property. So I am really very familiar with not only the character of the area, but with the change that some of the area there's been a lot of houses that have been taken down and replaced in the last 10 to 15 years, quite a surprising amount, as a matter of fact. So, and there has been some severance activity. I've been on the committee long enough to know that there's been severance activity all the way up to Cedar, all the way over to Blair. So there's been some change in the neighborhood already. So we are aware of that. But at the end of the day, it is the 4 tests in this particular situation that we need to consider, and that'll be the job of the committee. And like I said, I think we'll try and address that. We will address that. I'm just going to see whether or not first, Ms. Claremont, if there's any questions from the committee to Mr. Barry. Number 1, want to give them a chance to get clarification. All right, I'm not seeing any hands. So I do. So let me do this, because the other thing is that was my speakers list, but I do need to make a call out in general to anybody else who may be listening in and who may want to address the committee. Now's your chance. So if you're part of that list or in the neighborhood and you've been watching and you feel that you'd like to come forward, now's your chance. You just need to raise your hand. Just give it a minute, because sometimes it takes just a moment for technology to catch up, but I'm not seeing anybody come forward. Okay, so how about, I'm going to go to Ms. Claremont, give Ms. Claremont the 2 more minutes. And then Mr. Chan, we'll go to you. So Ms. Carmack, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to address a few things with regards to, Mr. Polton's presentation. It is Mr. Polton, correct? He had referenced a lot on actually Massey Lane, which not even the same. It was built after the fact. His measurement completely wrong. It's actually 29.15 according to MPAC, not 23. If that has any bearing on the committee's frame of mind and looking at his slides, his not highlighting subsection 3, section I, which does read very specifically that we must look at the committee applying consent before we can even talk to Mrs. Will's concern about the corner lot in the driveway and where it needs to be positioned.
So this is typical, right? So we always deal with the consent first, and then we deal with the minor variances to see whether or not they are appropriate for the proposed development. And we will do that. We'll deal with
yeah. And with regard to our zoning, there is no max lot coverage, which is obviously something of concern to the neighbors and the petition. With no maximum area coverage, 2 small lots make it in sort that we can't mitigate bulk and mass, which we can do with larger homes that are typical of the area and the renewal that the area is seeing by not imposing deep setbacks like have been imposed on other properties. If I may, what's very interesting is one of the City of Ottawa from the Planning Committee in their discussion with the corner lots. The discussion was the reason for allowing such severances is to permit the creation of infill houses that are of similar size to the ones that already exist. And in what we were seeing as the examples provided by the planners, in the older neighborhoods where you had lots that were 50 by 200, well, the corner lot would be divided so that the back part of the lot would be backing onto the last section. That would seem more reasonable as to why that provision came into discussion. But to blanket a policy or a provision across different zoning without that discussion, if it is minor, if it is something that is beneficial for the area, is really what I believe the committee needs to consider this evening. Is it's not something that should be available or proposed or permitted here.
I just want to remind you that Mr. Polton did provide evidence about exactly which sectors are intended by the zoning bylaw to specifically be captured in that provision, and that was the reason.
Blanket of that policy. Yeah.
So, but it is in the zoning bylaw, right? So it is an approved provision by City Council that's been in place for some time. So, like it or not, that is the policy that we have to deal with.
But only if it's approved by the committee, right? Like, is my understanding completely incorrect in that regard? It's like the cart ahead of the horse because it has to be approved by committee before, or is it just a fait accompli? Like, do we just say it's given to without debate?
What I'm suggesting to you when I say that is the second test, whether or not it is in keeping with the intent of the zoning bylaw. Okay. That provision becomes very important to us in making that determination. That's what I'm suggesting.
Thank you.
All right. So, Mr. Chown, you had your hand up. Did you want to provide any insight? Go ahead. I'm just going to give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I appreciate given the opportunity to respond to the comments from Ms. Clermont, Mr. Bateman, and Mr. Burial. I think it's important that we respond to some of those comments, and actually I'd like to respond to a couple of things that have been said by members of the committee as well before you come to a decision on the applications before you this evening. If I could ask the committee coordinator, I'm going to want to refer to a couple of slides in Mr. Polton's presentation. If I could ask the committee coordinator to please put up the slide that illustrates the schedule from the zoning bylaw where this provision applies. you put up this whole slide deck, I might be able to help find the right slide, but it was in the first half dozen slides, I think, of Mr. Bolton's presentation. Probably a little further in than that.
It should be slide 6.
Thank you, Mr. Bolton. So back up. Slide 6, please.
It's trying hard.
Yeah, it looks like there's a whole bunch of slides in this, so they might have joined all the presentations together. So my numbering might not help.
Back up 2 more. There we go. No. Sorry, the one with the schedule.
We need the Sector A slide.
Next one. That one, please, and thank you. Back 1 slide. Okay, if we can hold it there, please. So, Madam Chair, I'm probably one of the few people on this call that was part of the discussion at the time that the staff at the City of Ottawa recommended introducing this provision into the zoning bylaw, which applies only to corner lots and only in certain R1 zones, that allows for a severance of those corner lots where each of the new lots must have an area equal to at least 49% of the minimum required lot area. What's important about this schedule is to understand that that provision applies to all of Area A, and you'll see that there's a little area up at the north end of this schedule close to the Ottawa River, which is excluded from Area A, and that is Rockcliffe Village. Rothwell Heights is not exempt from this provision. Please leave it up. Rockcliffe Park is not exempt from the provision. Sorry, Rockcliffe Park is exempt from this provision. Rothwell Heights is not. So to suggest somehow that Rothwell Heights that this provision of the zoning bylaw shouldn't apply to Rothwell Heights simply isn't consistent with the decision of council and the recommendations of staff at the time that that provision was introduced to the zoning bylaw. You've heard from Ms. Clermont and Mr. Bateman that we didn't reach out to neighbors. We had the Zoom meeting, thank you, because I will want to go in another slide in this presentation. We had the Zoom meetings set up by the president of the community association. I know that Ms. Clermont was in attendance that evening. I was watching for her name because she had voiced concerns at the committee and raised concerns in writing. Even though she attended that meeting, she had no questions for us, and we didn't have any opportunity to have a dialogue with her that evening. She lives immediately across the street from the subject site. She is the owner of the property, highlighted on the figure that Mr. Polton took you to earlier in the presentation. If she wanted to have a discussion with us, she had the opportunity that evening to do that. I do not know whether or not Mr. Bateman was in attendance. I wasn't watching for his name. Madam Chair, you've indicated in response to comments on a number of occasions that in reviewing the applications this evening, you have to look at the 4 tests under the Planning Act. I want to be abundantly clear that those 4 tests do not apply to the severances. Those 4 tests apply to the minor variance, and the severances are not dependent upon the minor variance. We are not looking for relief in terms of lot width. We are not looking for relief with respect to lot area. We do not need the minor variance in order for the committee to deal with the consent applications. The tests for the consent applications are set out in section 5124 of the Planning Act and are not subject to the 4 tests for minor variances. So when evaluating the consents, I would respectfully request that the committee does not take into consideration the four tests for the minor variances, because we don't need the minor variance in order to get the consent. Now, Mr. Bateman talked about protecting the trees along Rebecca. If we can go to the slide that shows the tree information report, please. Thank you very much. So, as Mr. Polton explained, the yellow trees, highlighted trees on this figure are city-owned trees. They've been rated in terms of priority. We've got priority A, which applies to tree number 1, and priority A, which applies to tree number 6, and also to trees number 7, 8, and 9 at the corner of Rebecca Crescent and Combermere. Staff, both planning staff and the city forester, have asked that the committee impose conditions that will require our client to protect trees number 1 and 6 and to post security to guarantee the protection of those trees. So staff have turned their mind very carefully to what trees should be protected, and they've taken steps through their recommendations to the committee this evening to make sure that those trees are protected. I was intrigued by the comment about the proximity of this development, or the potential of this potential development, to Combermere Park. What a better solution could there be to allow yet another family to live across the street from Combermere Park than was allowed today by approving the severances, allowing for 2 houses to be constructed here instead of the one monster house that could be developed as of right on this property. Another family living across the street from Combermere Park has to be a good thing, not a bad thing. All of the intensification policies of the official plan apply to this neighborhood just like they apply to any other neighborhood. There is no reason for the committee to refuse the consent applications that are before you. And lastly, just the comment about this being a slippery slope if you allow these severances to go ahead. Remind the committee that the provisions we're relying on apply only to corner lots. All of the interior lots in this neighborhood are subject to the requirement of a minimum lot area, which is far greater than what is required for the corner lots. Also highlight that what is being provided through the severances is far greater than the minimum required under the zoning bylaw. Madam Chair, members of committee, we would urge you to accept the recommendations of your professional planning staff at the City of Ottawa, respect and accept the submissions of the professional planners that are acting on behalf of the applicant. We would urge you to approve the consents as filed, and the minor variance. The sole purpose of the minor variance is to ensure that we protect the trees along Combermere Lane and take advantage of the opening on Rebecca Crescent to provide access to the new house to be created on the corner lot. Madam Chair, members of the committee, subject to your questions, those are my submissions, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chown, and also thank you for correcting me with regards to the 4 tests. Because you're right, or at least in my case, I sometimes default to those 4 tests because they're actually pretty good tests to be applied to making decisions, even when it comes to consents. That said, you're right, it applies mainly to the minor, well, it does apply just to the minor variances. But we'll try and make sure that the rationale is clear for the members of the public who are attending this evening in terms of that decision. And that was really where I was trying to go with that point. So, and also thank you for your recommendations with regards to ensuring that we take into consideration the professional advice of the planners. And of course, as you know, we do give the professional planners quite a bit of weight when we consider decisions for the committee. That said, I just want to make sure that everybody knows our members of the public, the members of the panel do have backgrounds in planning, and in case this panel is actually very lucky in the sense that everybody on this panel has a planning background, so does understand very well what the issues are and can weigh the recommendations of staff, I think, with their experience. So, so that said, I think this committee is actually well placed to be dealing with an application like this. So that was just my little commentary to Mr. Chan's commentary. So Ms. Claremont, the public portion is closed, but I'm going to give you just a couple. Like a minute.
I do need clarification because according to the Eastern Municipal Services, Section 53 of the Planning Act does require conversation about consent. It is not a fait accompli as Mr. Chown seemed to suggest, or actually seems to direct the committee to say it's not a discussion to be had, it is something to be given.
No, and that's, and I agree with you in a sense, Ms. Claremont. I think that's why I may have, made the mistake of saying that we consider the policy context. So you have to consider what it is that we have to deal with. There's expressions of city council in terms of what the policies are that we should be applying for all of those things. That's what we need to consider. That's part of our job, is to weigh all of that. Staff has done the same thing in their planning report. They have considered whether, and they look specifically at the official plan. They looked at, does this proposal make sense within the context of the environment that we're dealing with? And I'm talking about the policy environment, it's the provisions, all of those things. So and that's exactly the same light that we have to look at that in as well. So it's not a fait accompli. It's still, does this make sense? Is it in keeping with the character of the neighborhood? We often ask for lotting evidence, and that's why Mr. Polton provided that lotting evidence to us, to show us, notwithstanding that maybe there's a difference between what the provincial system has and maybe with the City of Ottawa's mapping system, maybe there is a difference. But the point is, what he's showing is that there's variations in the frontages along Rebecca, which is the kind of evidence that we look for, right? In terms of show us that there's already been some change within that streetscape that would indicate that there is, we should be considering maybe shorter frontages because it's in that light. Does that provision make sense in the application of that provision today because of that, right? So you have that evidence to say, yes, it makes some sense for that to be applied here. I think that's the point that Mr. Polton was trying to make in his presentation when he provided that information. So with that, then we don't have any other speakers. I just want to make sure the committee members have a chance to ask any final questions that they would have. Could be of Mr. Polton, Mr. Chown, staff. Nothing? All right. So then we're going to have to deal with the consent application first, which is, did we get enough planning evidence from Mr. Polton to consider a severance in this location? So, and I don't know if, so I promised we're going to give you some of the background. From what I'm looking at the official plan policies, the evidence that's been provided to us, there is very significant basis within the official plan to look at intensification. It doesn't say in the plan that intensification has to be simply on the basis of whether you're close to public transit. These are important things, but they're not. It doesn't mean that it's exclusive. It doesn't mean that the committee can't consider a severance within an urban area unless there is there's bus transit within, 400 meters or 600 meters from that property. And in this case, there is bus service. Is it that 24/7 bus service? Well, not that anybody has 24/7, but is it like the regular bus service that other neighborhoods have, like Beacon Hill North, for example? No, not quite. But, we have to make a determination as to whether or not that's sufficient to say, right, this doesn't make any sense from an intensification standpoint because it just doesn't have the services that the city requires for that intensification. So that's the kind of information we need to make that decision on the consent. From the evidence, I think that from my standpoint, and so when we're going to go to a vote, I think we have what we need from Mr. Polton to suggest that this is actually a consent application that's worthy of consideration. Given the fact that it seems to align with the official plan policies, it does align. We know it does align with the zoning bylaw. Is it appropriate development for the area? Can't say that it doesn't fit the character of the area. It's another single family home. And then the last tab is appropriate. Is it minor? And I think what we've been able to see is that in fact the development that's being proposed tries to reduce the impact to the extent possible, keeping that, and that's the reason for the minor variance. So it makes some sense. So with that, is there any other member of the committee who would like to make a comment about the consent before we go to a vote? Reasons for or your reasons against the consent? All right, quiet bunch. I don't know whether it's late.
Madam Chair, Madam
Oh,
Chair.
you're there. Okay, good. Go ahead.
I see it a little bit differently in that when we're looking at a consent application, we have to decide, first of all, whether or not it's more appropriately a subdivision application, which goes through a different process, but it is dealt with by the same section of the Planning Act, as Mr. Chown pointed out, that there are certain things that we look at. He has already said that the severance can go without the variance. So I'm assuming that we're going to look at it separately. And even if the variances are turned down, he wants to proceed with the severance. I don't know if that's the case or not. That's what I'm assuming. But given if that is the case, it doesn't matter. We don't look at things about like the 4 tests of the Planning Act. That's for the variance end. And if we were looking at a lot that had to have variances in order for the severance to occur, if we were looking at lot size, area, then yes, we have to do them together. But in this case, we have no reason to turn down this severance. It complies with the zoning bylaw 100%. Whether it is, I mean, that in itself should determine that it's appropriate development. It's when we get into the variances that are determining the severance that they get intermixed. But in this case, the severance is a slam dunk. It complies with the zoning bylaw. It doesn't require a subdivision application. They've got all the conditions. It's our job as the committee to impose the conditions that would otherwise be imposed through the subdivision approval process. We know it's going to have public services. We know it's going to have to get a driveway permit. It's going through all the processes already. So we deal with the severance on the basis of what the Planning Act tells us to look at. And we would be at the board in a nanosecond if we turned this down on the basis that it doesn't meet some official plan requirement when it complies fully with the zoning bylaw. So
I would agree with you, Ms. Willis, but the one thing that I think is important, and this is why we asked for the lotting evidence, is whether or not it is actually in keeping with the character of the area. And I think that that's fair enough.
I disagree. I'm sorry. I think that is if you're trying to vary it from the zoning bylaw, then yes, I would agree. But in this case, the zoning says it can go. So.
Okay. All right. But, well, that's why we're here. We have 5 different opinions about how we may approach things. I mean, it actually is what enriches the committee, not the opposite. So, so I appreciate all of those comments. That's fine. Okay. Any other thoughts? All right. So we're going to go to the vote then for the consent. So all those in favor of the consent application. Well, actually, before I go there, is there anything with regards to the conditions, Mr. Poulton or Mr. Chown, that you want to discuss? Because sometimes we do that after the fact.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's far more important for us to get this approved with the conditions as recommended by staff. We're not going to question any of the recommended conditions. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chown. All right, I'm just looking at these conditions. I just want to make sure that, because we have members of the public that have a keen interest, I just want to make sure they understand that there are several conditions that are being imposed. One of which, with regard to the trees. So, with regards to the trees, one of the things that we find really interesting, we don't often see on the committee, is the extent to which there are conditions regarding securities, for example. We don't often see those. There is the tree information report and permissions from owners required. So there's some fairly onerous things that are in these conditions that we don't always see when we have consent applications. So I just want, obviously that doesn't give you, Ms. Claremont, any kind of comfort, but it is a fact that there is quite a bit in here to help protect and ensure the development's done correctly. I'm not going to the public at this point. I think we need to go to a vote. Members of the committee, all those in favor? I think we had started that. All right, so for the record, the consent application is granted by the committee unanimously. And we're going to go right to the minor variance, and that one is probably much easier than the consent. So all those in favor of the minor variance? All right. For the record, the minor variance is also granted unanimously by the committee. Just a reminder to the members of the public, if you're unsatisfied with the decision of the committee, you do have the ability to appeal the decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal. And if you want any more information about that, there is some on our website, but feel free to speak with our committee staff. So that's
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr. Paulton.
Thank you very
Hold on
much.
again. You did a good presentation, good and fulsome, so thanks for that. Appreciate it. All right, we have one more application, folks. We're not done for our evening. And that relates to Hartley. So we're going to ask for Mr. Cooper to come back. For a minute there, I thought maybe we lost Mr. Cooper.
Actually, can you hear me now?
We can hear you. We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Oh, there we go. I'll start my video. There we go. I'm still here and I'm still awake.
Yeah. Oh, yes. This is a later evening for us. So, all right. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided to you as part of the application process by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies, that it was there for the prescribed number of days prior to the hearing, and that it was visible and legible for the entirety of that time? Do you either swear or affirm that to be true?
I affirm that to be true.
All right, thank you very much. So in terms of any changes to your application, I don't see anything that we need to do from a notice standpoint. So with that, then I'm going to, no presentation required. We're just going to go to questions at this point. Committee members, any questions for Mr. Cooper? No, it must be the hour. All right, so just let me look at this. Sometimes I forget where we were with this, so just want to make sure I understand the application.
Actually, Madam Chair, I couldn't get my video started. I'm sorry. I did have a question for Mr. Cooper, if I may.
Yes,
if I understand correctly, with the original discussions you had, and you had offered up pairing the driveways in the center of the two units and allowing that one tree number, help me with this.
I think it was tree number 1, but
tree number 1, that's right. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but the person that you spoke to at the time was not in favor of that, given that I'm putting words in other people's mouths, that no parking was required, and an easier solution to that might be just remove the parking from the that one unit, and since parking is not a requirement. So had you not proceeded this far, would you have, and with the technical drawings and things, would you have carried on with that discussion about going for an additional variance to have the driveways paired rather than having to deal with the loss of that tree?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Ms. Willis. And yes, we certainly would have. And the driveways would not have been paired. We would have sort of had a flip-flop. So the one of the dwellings would have had the driveway where it does presently, and then we would have provided the other driveway closer to the center, where we would have then had to put a carport, but because it was not supported by planning, and I felt the risk of going for a minor variance for either a carport or a garage was elevated, that the risk was just too high. And so because of that, we chose instead to take the path of the current proposal, which necessitates the removal of that tree. So I think it is regrettable that there was no opportunity or more of a willingness to have a dialogue about options, because again, it was that was my first instinct, honestly. And this is what we tabled very, very early days. And because there was no appetite, then we took a different route, which then necessitated the removal of the tree. And it's unfortunate, but you're absolutely right.
So just to follow through then from what Ms. Kelly had said previously was that it's unfortunate the tree has to go. And if I'm putting words in somebody's mouth again, it is that that the tree, unfortunately, the tree might have to go, but at least there's tree compensation that can mitigate against that. Is that a fair comment, Ms. Kelly?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, that is a fair comment. I can also add additional clarification. So the original proposal, from my understanding, that was submitted in December, early January, featured front-facing carports or garages. I'm not sure, Mr. Cooper. And the issue was that that would require an additional variance from the mature neighborhoods overlay.
Yes.
And it is staff's opinion, for my understanding, all applications that try to vary from the mature neighborhoods, that we cannot support those variances. So in terms of a lesser of the two evils, staff indicated to Mr. Cooper that we would have to indicate some concerns with the proposed removal, but Ms. Young indicated that she would be supportive of compensation if necessary.
Got it. So there's been quite an evolution of this this proposal. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Ms. Markovich.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just sort of maybe building on the evolution of the proposal, I just wondered if you could provide a bit more detail on any subsequent engagement with the surrounding community, given the way this has evolved. And also when I'm looking back at the original application, there's some indications of outreach with some of the neighbors, but just wondering if any further engagement happened, particularly with those on either side immediately of the subject property.
Yeah, thank you for your question. We certainly did, and I always encourage my clients to have engagement with neighbors. And in fact, in this case, I joined my client and we did a door-to-door. We walked and we spoke. We knocked on the door of all of the abutting neighbors, abutting across the street, any neighbors that we share property line with, including the rear yard. And everybody that we spoke to, there was one woman, I believe, who was a tenant in one of the semi-detached buildings across the street. She expressed some general concerns about intensification and the inconvenience that it brings, but there was no indication of significant concerns. In fact, one of the neighbors in the rear yard had no concern whatsoever, and he was pleased to see that this old sort of dilapidated bungalow was going to be replaced with a nice, modern and attractive project. So, and we reached out also to the ward councillor to get information about local community groups that could have interest, and we contacted the Bay Ward, both with the original application as well as the subsequent recirculation, to make sure that they were in the loop and that they were aware of what relief we were requesting. So I think we did a pretty transparent and honest job of fully consulting with the local community. And as a result, there was no significant concern. As you can see, no one has come forward. There has been there were no letters of opposition. The community association had no concern. And we believe it's because the proposed application, although unfortunate that we are going to lose a tree potentially, is appropriate. And it's in fact evidenced there are many, many similar developments occurring within this zone. And one of the pieces of evidence I submitted to the committee early days shows 30 or more projects in this area which enjoy similar reduced lot widths and lot area to what we've been requesting.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Cooper, for that. Any other questions, Mr. Cooper? Okay, not seeing any, then I don't have anybody on our speakers list for this item. So is there anyone, it doesn't look like there's many people left, but is there anyone in the audience who'd like to speak either for or against this application? Okay, I'm not seeing anybody come forward. So Mr. Cooper, then before we go to the consent application, are there any conditions that you would like to discuss?
I don't believe specifically. I was curious about the condition from Bell. I'm never a big fan of easements being registered. But I don't, it may be one of those conditions that there's just no room for discussion. So I've advised my client about it, but it'd be useful for me to know if the committee is willing or able to comment as to whether or not these are, standard. And I know it brings additional expense to my client. So I thought it would be useful to know a little bit more about, why it's being applied.
All right, so these are technical agencies external to the city. So they simply provide us with what their requirements are going to be, but I may look to Mr. Belmar to help me on this. So when we have conditions that come from staff, they don't include some of these external technical committees or agencies, I should say more correctly. So do these conditions automatically get added to the list? Mr. Belmar?
Yes, Madam Chair. When we receive requests for easements from public utilities, whether Rogers, Bell Canada, Hydro Ottawa, in this case, Bell Canada is requesting a 2.4 meter wide strip to measure 1.2 meter on either side of the aerial facilities, as can be reasonably accommodated. So we do impose those conditions.
Lost Mr. Belmar. Okay, so I think I know he's been having some trouble with his video this evening. So, all right, Mr. White.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I was just looking at the condition. It refers to a aerial facility. So there must be some overhead wiring that on the property.
In the rear yard, yes, there is. Yeah, there's a bunch of bell lines that run down that property line.
Yeah, so they're just asking for, I guess, registration of there probably isn't one now, and they're asking for it in order to allow for them to maintain that overhead line. I think it's a reasonable request for people who rely on bell services in the neighborhood.
Understood. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. White. I mean, I don't disagree with it. I think it's one of those, it's an odd one in some regards, because I think that even if you don't have an easement, they still have a reasonable right, I think, to be able to have access to their facilities. So anyways, that was just something that I wanted to ask about, just more not specific to this file, but just in general, where they get the authority to request that. But I don't think that my client objects to it, and I don't suspect that if she did, it would make a difference. So I was just looking for a bit more information. I appreciate your comments.
No, you did ask a good question though, Mr. Cooper, in the sense of how do we deal with the utilities when they do come in? Are they applied just as they've come in? And I think they are. I think that's where Mr. Belmar was going with on this. If it's not reasonable, it would seem to me that we would pick up the phone and talk with some of these technical agencies. But go ahead, Mr. White.
Yeah, Madam Chair, it's identical to a new plan of subdivision situation where the utilities are request legitimately and are granted easements on plans of subdivision to service the properties in that plan of subdivision. And we're dealing with a miniature subdivision plan here, and that's a legitimate request by the utility.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. I was just trying to figure out, just to get clarity in terms of how we deal with it at our end, right? So we know how we deal with ones coming from city staff, but I wasn't sure how they were incorporated otherwise. But no, I agree. I wasn't suggesting that we remove it as a condition. So, okay. With that, then I think we need to go to a vote. So it was just, the whole basis was to get at those conditions. I think we heard from Mr. Cooper, he's accepting everything. So on the consent application, all those in favor? All right, so the application is granted unanimously. On the minor variances, all those in favor? All right, again, the application is unanimously granted. Thank you, Mr. Cooper, for your time this evening.
Thank you for your time as well. Good evening.
And, for sticking with us until 10:22.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I learned quite a bit tonight, actually, listening to all the other applications. It was quite informative.
So did I. I learned quite a bit tonight too.
I'm sure it's like that every night. I can imagine you guys are constantly seeing new and strange scenarios.
It's
Thank
true,
you.
but it's all part of the fun. So thank you very much. And with that, I need a motion to adjourn. Ms. Willis, seconded by Ms. Markovich. And before we go, as always, thank you to our Secretary Treasurer and to our coordinators, as well as our two